The fluorescent lights of Walter Reed Medical Center cast harsh shadows across the examination room, sterile white walls closing in like the confession booth of a church where only the worst truths were spoken. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Blackwood sat perfectly still on the padded table, her posture military straight despite the tremor she felt deep in her fingertips. The tremor no one else could see yet. The tremor that would end everything she had become, everything she had sacrificed to achieve. Outside the window, autumn rain fell on Washington, D.C., gray and cold and relentless. Commuters hurried past with umbrellas. Congressmen argued policy in climate-controlled offices. Students rushed to classes at Georgetown. Normal people living normal lives, utterly unaware that 30 feet above them, in a secured wing of the nation's premier military hospital, a woman was receiving a death sentence dressed up in medical terminology. Dr. Richard Kowalski studied the MRI scans on his tablet, his weathered face unreadable behind silver-rimmed glasses that had witnessed too many impossible diagnoses. 40 years of treating soldiers had taught him how to deliver bad news with clinical precision. But the woman before him was not like other soldiers. She was something else entirely. Something the military whispered about in secure briefings and late-night conversations among those with clearances so high they barely existed on paper. He had treated Navy SEALs who could run 50 miles on broken legs. He had stitched Delta Force operators back together after firefights that would have killed normal humans 3 times over. He had watched Green Berets walk out of his hospital with injuries that should have left them paralyzed for life. But Evelyn Blackwood existed in a category beyond those exceptional warriors. Her medical file was classified 3 levels above his clearance. Her real name did not appear in any hospital database. The tests he had run over the past 6 weeks required authorization from JSOC commanders whose identities he would never know. 6 months ago this moment, 6 months that felt like yesterday and forever simultaneously, compressed and elongated by the weight of what came next. The doctor finally looked up, met her ice blue eyes. Eyes that had seen things he would never comprehend, done things that kept America's enemies awake at night in cold sweats. Progressive sensory neuropathy, he said quietly. The words landed like artillery rounds in the small room. Your nervous system is deteriorating. The specialized training you underwent, the enhanced sensory protocols, they accelerated something already present in your genetic makeup. We believe it's a combination of extreme stress, repeated exposure to concussive trauma, and the neurological enhancements themselves. Evelyn did not blink. How long? The doctor hesitated. 18 to 24 months before your abilities deteriorate significantly. Your superhuman reflexes, your enhanced spatial awareness, your ability to process sensory data at impossible speeds. All of it will degrade. Eventually, you'll lose fine motor control altogether. Can I still operate? For now, yes, but I'm recommending immediate medical retirement. Every mission accelerates the damage. Every firefight, every high-stress situation, it's killing your nervous system faster. Evelyn stood, her movements still fluid and precise, the ghost of what she would lose, performing perfectly one last time. She walked to the window, looked out over the Potomac River. Somewhere beyond that water, beyond the monuments and memorials, Americans slept safely. They slept because people like her made impossible choices in impossible places. Then I have 18 months to make them count, she said. Commander, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Doctor. She turned, and for just a moment, he saw something in her expression that made him glad they were on the same side. I understand that I have limited time to do what I was trained to do, so I'm going to use every second of it. She walked out of Walter Reed Medical Center that day knowing she would never return as a patient. Whatever happened next, wherever her deteriorating nervous system took her, she would face it on her own terms. In the field, doing the work that defined her. 6 months later, she was halfway around the world, standing on a rocky hillside in Afghanistan, watching the sun bleed across the horizon like a wound in the sky. The light was different here, harsh and unforgiving, burning away softness and leaving only hard edges and harder choices. The village of Khost Pinshir clung to the mountainside like a prayer spoken by desperate men. Small mud brick structures that had weathered centuries of conquest and war, each stone soaked in blood from conflicts that predated memory. The orphanage sat at the village's highest point, a Soviet-era building repurposed and reinforced by American engineers, now housing 32 children who had lost everything to the endless conflict that ground this land to dust year after year, generation after generation. These children had no parents, no homes, no futures except what mercy could provide. Their fathers had died fighting for causes they barely understood. Their mothers had perished in drone strikes, in suicide bombings, and crossfire that cared nothing for innocence. Some were 6 years old, some were 16, but they all had the same eyes, old eyes, eyes that had seen things children should never witness. American forces had promised evacuation, promised safety, promised a future these children had never known and could barely imagine. The kind of promise that military forces made with good intentions and frequently broke through circumstance and necessity in the cold mathematics of strategic priority. Evelyn had come to make good on that promise, not because command had ordered it, but because she had learned from Marcus Sullivan that promises to children were the only ones that truly mattered. Break promises to politicians, to generals, to allies and enemies, and the world kept turning. Break promises to children, and you lost the only thing that made the fighting mean anything at all. She knelt at the edge of the compound, her Mark 13 sniper rifle resting against a sun-bleached boulder that radiated stored heat into the cooling evening air. Beside her stood a girl who should not have been there, should have been anywhere else in the world except this place where death came on silent wings and left nothing but grief in its wake. Emma Sullivan was 16 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation braid that would have made any drill instructor proud, green eyes that held intelligence far beyond her years, and a depth of loss that aged her in ways that time alone could never accomplish. Her jaw was set with determination that reminded Evelyn of someone she had lost, someone whose ghost walked beside them both every moment of every day, an invisible third member of their partnership. The girl wore civilian hiking clothes, RESA catalog practical, but her posture was pure military. West Point Preparatory Program, top of her class in tactics and strategy, computer science and physical conditioning. The daughter of a legend, carrying the weight of a name she barely understood and a legacy she had never asked to inherit. Marcus Sullivan's daughter, standing on a battlefield in the country that had killed her father, learning lessons that no teenager should need to know. "You're sure about this?" Emma said quietly, her voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. Her gaze swept the valley below, cataloging threats with an intuition that was partly training, partly inheritance. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She was listening to the wind, feeling it against her exposed skin, processing data her brain translated into tactical information. Wind speed, direction, temperature gradients, humidity, variables that would affect bullet trajectory, enemy movement, the probability of death measured in millimeters in milliseconds. "Your father used to ask me the same thing," Evelyn finally said. "Before every mission. Are you sure, Eve? Are you absolutely certain?" Emma's breath caught. She rarely spoke of her father to anyone, and no one spoke of him to her. The official records said training accident. The truth was buried under classifications so deep that even Emma's security clearance, temporary and provisional as it was, could not touch it. "What did you tell him?" "The same thing I'm telling you now." Evelyn's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. Certainty is a luxury we can't afford. We do what needs doing, and we live with the consequences. Movement in the valley below, barely visible in the fading light, but unmistakable to eyes trained to see death approaching from miles away. 3 Toyota Hilux trucks, heavily modified with reinforced suspension and mounted weapons, technical vehicles that had become the signature of insurgent warfare across the Middle East and Central Asia. Black Serpent insurgents, the most dangerous militant group operating in the region, better trained and equipped than Taliban, more ideologically driven than simple bandits. They controlled the roads, the checkpoints, the night itself, and they were moving toward the village with purpose, with the kind of deliberate coordination that spoke of planning and intelligence and lethal intent. Evelyn's radio crackled to life, the encrypted burst transmission carrying Victor Kane's voice across the kilometers that separated them. Master Chief Petty Officer Victor Kane, 58 years old and still operating in the field because retirement meant death for men like him. His voice was gravel rough and battlefield weary, carrying the accumulated weight of 35 years in special operations. "Ghost, we've got the kids loaded in the transports. Delta team is ready to roll on your mark." The children were crying, he did not say. Scared and traumatized, and clinging to American soldiers who represented the first safety they had known in years. The medics were treating malnutrition and disease, distributing blankets and water, and hope in small, measured doses. She keyed her radio, her voice professionally neutral despite the tactical problem developing in front of her. Enemy movement Valley South. 3 vehicles. Hold position. Copy that. There was a pause, the kind that came before difficult questions. Ghost, you reading me clear? Affirmative. Good. Because I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Kane's voice dropped lower, shifting from operator to concerned guardian, from military professional to family friend. The tone of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, survived too much, and carried the responsibility for every soul under his protection. Does the kid really need to be here? Does Marcus's daughter need to be on this hillside watching her father's war continue without him? Evelyn glanced at Emma, saw the girl's hands steady on her own binoculars as she tracked the enemy vehicles with practiced precision, saw the focus in her young face that was part natural talent and part inherited instinct, saw Marcus Sullivan's ghost standing between them, a memory so vivid it could have been real, so powerful it shaped every decision Evelyn made. She needs to understand, Evelyn said quietly, knowing Kane would hear everything she was not saying. Before it's too late, before I'm gone, and there's no one left to teach her what Marcus wanted her to know. Understand what? What her father died for. What I'm dying for. What she might die for if she chooses this life. The truth that recruiting posters never mentioned, that politicians carefully avoided, that families discovered too late, that serving meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant loss, and loss meant carrying ghosts that never quite let you rest. There was a long pause on the radio. Victor Kane was 58 years old, a lifetime of special operations etched into every scar and callus on his hands, carved into the lines around his eyes, burned into neural pathways that would never let him sleep soundly again. He had been Marcus Sullivan's best friend, had stood beside him in Fallujah and Kandahar, and a dozen other places where Americans fought and bled and died for reasons that seemed clearer before the shooting started. He had helped raise Emma after Marcus's death, had been the stable presence in her life when everything else fell apart, had earned the right to question, to push back, to demand better for the girl he loved like his own daughter. Your call, Ghost. Kane's voice carried acceptance and resignation and a warning all at once. But if something happens to her, I'm the one who has to explain it to her grandmother. I'm the one who has to stand at another grave and tell another woman that her family died serving their country. I've done that too many times already. Nothing's going to happen to her, Evelyn said, making a promise she had no business making, staking her reputation on an outcome she could not guarantee. I give you my word. Your word's good enough for me. It always has been. Kane out. The radio fell silent, leaving only the whisper of wind across stone and the distant rumble of diesel engines as enemy vehicles approached the village below. Emma lowered her binoculars, turned to look at Evelyn with eyes too old for her young face, eyes that had learned grief before joy, loss before love. He worries about you, Emma said. He worries about everyone. It's his job. It's what keeps him human when everything else about this life tries to make us into machines. He was my father's best friend. I know, they served together for 15 years, saved each other's lives more times than either could count. You were my father's partner, his last partner. Evelyn felt the words like a blade between her ribs, sharp and precise and utterly accurate, cutting through every defense she had built in 3 years of trying not to think about Marcus Sullivan bleeding out while she listened helplessly on an encrypted radio channel. Yes. Tell me what happened. Tell me how he really died. No more lies about training accidents. No more classified mission deflections. Just the truth. The wind picked up, carrying dust and memory across the hillside. The eternal wind of Afghanistan that had blown across these mountains for millennia and would keep blowing long after every American had gone home. Evelyn could have deflected, could have maintained operational security, could have protected Emma from truth the way adults always protected children from the worst parts of the world, from the knowledge that sometimes good people died for bad reasons and there was no cosmic justice to balance the scales. But Emma was not a child, not anymore, and the lie had already done its damage. Not here, Evelyn said. Not now. When this is done, when the children are safe, I'll tell you everything. Promise. I promise. Emma nodded, seemed to accept this. Then she reached into her jacket, pulled out a small photograph. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded. Two soldiers in full kit, standing in front of a Chinook helicopter. One was a man in his early 30s, dark-haired and easy-smiled. The other was a younger version of Evelyn, before the weight of all those missions had settled into her bones. "I found this in Dad's footlocker," Emma said quietly. "After he died. You two look happy." Evelyn stared at the photograph, felt something crack in her chest. Marcus Sullivan's smile, frozen in that moment before everything went wrong. For the mission that should have been routine turned into a nightmare. Before he made the choice that saved her life and ended his. "We were," Evelyn said. "Your father was the best operator I ever worked with, the best person I ever knew." "Then why did he die?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with all the weight of loss and confusion and anger that came with grief. Evelyn wanted to explain that sometimes good people died for bad reasons, that war was random and cruel and utterly indifferent to virtue. But Emma deserved better than platitudes. "Because he chose to," Evelyn said. "He had a choice, save himself or save the mission. He chose the mission. He chose me." Emma's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She had cried herself empty years ago, Evelyn suspected. Now there was only the ache of absence, the wound that never quite healed. "I want to be like him," Emma said. "No," Evelyn replied, her voice sharp. "You don't. Trust me." "Why not?" "Because your father is dead, and I'm dying, and this life takes everything from you and gives nothing back except ghosts." Emma stared at her, and for a moment she looked so much like Marcus that Evelyn had to look away. When the girl spoke again, her voice was steady, determined, utterly unmoved. "You're wrong. It gives us purpose. It gives us meaning. It gives us the chance to matter." Evelyn felt something shift inside of her, something she had thought long dead stirring back to life. Hope, maybe. Or just the recognition that the next generation would make the same mistakes, chase the same impossible ideals, sacrifice themselves on the same altar of duty and honor. Her radio crackled. "Ghost, this is Overwatch. We have situation developing. Emergency traffic on SEAL channels. Team 9 is in contact. Heavy casualties, requesting immediate support." The transmission carried the controlled urgency of experienced operators who had seen this scenario play out too many times, who knew exactly how fast a routine mission could spiral into catastrophe. Evelyn's attention snapped back to the present, to the tactical situation developing around them like a storm front moving across the Hindu Kush. SEAL Team 9, Jackson Hayes' unit. She knew Hayes had served with him years ago during her time with conventional SEAL teams, before Omega Ghost Division had recruited her for their experimental program. Good officer, better man, the kind of leader who put his people first and himself last, who would hold position until every one of his warriors was accounted for. If he was calling for help, if Jackson Hayes was breaking radio protocol to request immediate support, the situation was already desperate, bordering on hopeless. She keyed her radio. "Overwatch, this is Ghost. What's their location?" "K7 Valley, 21 kilometers west of your position. They were escorting civilian refugees when they got hit. Sophisticated ambush, coordinated fire from multiple positions. Air support grounded due to weather. They're surrounded and taking casualties. Ammunition critical, medical critical, time critical." Evelyn's mind calculated automatically, running scenarios faster than any computer could process. 21 kilometers. Rough terrain, elevation changes, potential obstacles, and enemy positions between here and there. If she moved fast, pushed her failing body to its absolute limits, ran the kind of pace that would destroy normal humans and left even elite operators gasping, maybe she could make it in time. Maybe she could arrive before Jackson Hayes and his team were erased from existence by an enemy that had them precisely where they wanted them. Maybe. Ghost, be advised. JSOC is considering activation of special protocols. Your presence may be requested. Stand by for further instructions. Special protocols. The euphemism hung in the air between transmission and reception, carrying weight that only a handful of people in the entire military establishment could fully comprehend. There was only one protocol that fit the description, one contingency that JSOC reserved for moments of absolute desperation, when conventional operations had failed and American lives hung in the balance, and the impossible needed to become possible through the application of capabilities that officially did not exist. Wrath Protocol. The designation that had defined her career, that had transformed Evelyn Blackwood from an exceptional SEAL operator into something that existed in the shadows between human and myth. W8008, the number that appeared on mission briefs when conventional operations had failed, when American lives hung in the balance by threads so thin they could barely be seen, when the impossible needed to become possible. She had been Wrath-01 for 8 years, had completed 23 missions under that designation, each one more impossible than the last, each one pushing her further beyond the limits of human capability. 23 times she had done the impossible, saved the unsavable, won the unwinnable. 23 times she had walked into situations where the enemy had every advantage and walked out leaving nothing but bodies and confusion and reports that would be classified for 50 years. And every single time she had paid a price in blood and sanity and pieces of her soul she would never get back. Every mission carved away another part of her humanity, replaced it with cold precision and calculated violence. The Evelyn Blackwood who had joined the Navy at 18 was gone, buried under layers of classified operations and necessary evils. What remained was Wrath-01, the weapon JSOC had spent 8 years perfecting. A weapon that was now breaking down from the inside, nerve damage destroying the enhanced capabilities that made her useful, time running out measured in missions instead of years. Understood, she said quietly, her voice carrying none of the thoughts racing through her mind. Standing by. Emma was watching her, reading the tension in her posture, with the intuition that came from growing up around military personnel, from learning to decode adult conversations through what was not said rather than what was spoken aloud. What's happening? SEAL team in trouble. Bad situation. The kind that usually ends with folded flags and military funerals and generals saying words about honor and sacrifice to families who just want their people back alive. Are you going to help them? Evelyn looked at the girl, saw Marcus Sullivan's daughter with her father's determination burning in her young eyes, saw the next generation of warriors who would carry this burden when she finally fell and could not get back up, saw the choice that was no choice at all, because walking away was never really an option for people like them, for the ones who had sworn oaths and meant them, who understood that service meant answering calls even when answering meant dying. If they activate the protocol, yes. Emma reached out, gripped Evelyn's arm with surprising strength. Take me with you. Absolutely not. Why, I can help. I've been training for this. You've been training in classrooms and simulators. That's not real. This is real. People die in real. My father died in real, Emma shot back. And he believed in this. Believed it mattered. If you're going to tell me his story, I need to see what his life meant. I need to understand what you do. Evelyn started to argue, to explain all the reasons this was insane, all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But the words died in her throat because she saw the truth in Emma's eyes. The girl was not asking for permission. She was stating intent. You stay with Victor Kane, Evelyn said finally. You do exactly what he tells you. You don't take risks, you don't play hero, you don't do anything except observe and survive. Clear. Crystal. I mean it, Emma. Your father saved my life. I won't waste that by getting his daughter killed. Then don't get me killed. Emma's smile was small but fierce. Get us both home alive. Before Evelyn could respond, her radio erupted with urgent traffic. All stations, this is JSOC actual. Wrath protocol is active. Repeat. Wrath protocol is active. Wrath-01, you are cleared hot. Mission brief follows. Evelyn felt her heart rate drop, felt the familiar cold clarity settle over her like armor. This was what she had been made for. This was the purpose that defined her, the mission that justified the cost. She turned to Emma. Time to move. Stay close, stay quiet, and do exactly what I tell you. What about the children here? Victor Kane's voice cut in on the radio. Ghost, Delta has the kids. We're moving to extraction now. You focus on Team 9. We'll handle the package. Evelyn nodded even though Kane could not see her. Copy that, Chief. Keep them safe. Always do. And Ghost, she heard the smile in his voice. Bring the kid back in one piece. I don't want to explain bullet holes to her grandmother. Roger that. Evelyn stood, her body moving with the fluid grace that 8 years of impossible missions had burned into muscle memory. She performed a final equipment check with practiced efficiency. Mark 13 rifle, 32 rounds of match-grade ammunition. Sig Sauer P226 sidearm, 3 magazines. Combat knife, 8 inches of folded steel that had saved her life more times than she could count. Encrypted radio, trauma kit, water, high-calorie rations. Everything she needed to survive, to fight, to win. Emma stood beside her, and Evelyn saw the girl's hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Good. Fear was useful if you knew how to channel it, deadly if you let it control you. They moved down the hillside together, ghost and student, legend and legacy. Behind them, Victor Kane's Delta team loaded orphan children into armored transports, gave them water and blankets, and whispered reassurances in languages the kids barely understood. Ahead of them, 21 kilometers of hostile territory stretched toward a valley where American warriors were dying by inches. Evelyn's radio crackled with the mission brief, General Thomas Crawford's voice carrying the weight of command and something else. Regret, maybe, or just bone-deep weariness. Wrath-01, this is JSOC Actual. SEAL Team 9 is pinned in K7 Valley. 47 hostile combatants, heavy weapons, overlapping fields of fire. 3 KIA, 4 wounded, ammunition critical. Air support unavailable due to weather conditions. Extraction impossible with current enemy disposition. Your mission is to neutralize enemy forces and create corridor for Team 9 extraction. Evelyn's mind was already processing the tactical problem, running scenarios, calculating angles and distances and probabilities of success. 47 enemies, mountainous terrain, limited ammunition. Enemy with prepared positions and superior numbers. On paper, it was suicide. In reality, it was Tuesday. Understood, Actual. ETA to target area 12 minutes, requesting all available intelligence. Sending now. In 01, there was a pause, the kind that came before bad news. There's something else you should know. Go ahead. The enemy commander in K7 Valley is Khalid al-Rahman. Black Serpent leadership. We have confirmed identification. Evelyn's stride did not falter, but inside her something went very cold. Khalid al-Rahman, the name that haunted her dreams, the face that appeared in every quiet moment. The man who had killed Marcus Sullivan 3 years ago in a valley not far from where Team 9 now fought for their lives. Copy that, she said, her voice betraying nothing. 01, are you compromised for this mission? Negative, Actual, I am mission capable. There was another pause, then Crawford's voice came back. Quieter now, almost gentle. Evelyn, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. She had not heard him use her first name in years. The generals and admirals who controlled Wrath Protocol treated operators like precision weapons, tools to be deployed and maintained. First names suggested humanity, connection, the possibility that the person on the other end of the radio might matter beyond their tactical utility. There is no other way, she said, and you know it. Crawford sighed, the sound of a man sending soldiers to their deaths for the 100th time, the 1,000th time, knowing each one carved another piece out of his soul. Godspeed, Wrath-01. Bring our people home. The connection cut. Evelyn increased her pace, her body moving efficiently across the broken ground. Beside her, Emma matched her stride, the girl's conditioning evident in her controlled breathing, her economical movements. Who's Khalid al-Rahman, Emma asked. Evelyn did not answer immediately. They were crossing a dry riverbed now, stones crunching under their boots, the sounds somehow loud in the vast silence of the Afghan landscape. Someone I should have killed 3 years ago, Evelyn finally said. Is he the one who killed my father? The question landed like a physical blow. Evelyn had spent 3 years avoiding this conversation, maintaining operational security, protecting Emma from truth that would only bring pain. But the girl deserved honesty, deserved to know what enemy had taken her father from her. Yes, Evelyn said quietly. Emma was silent for several steps. When she spoke again, her voice was harder, colder, aided by sudden understanding. Then this is personal. Everything is personal. Evelyn checked her GPS, adjusted their heading slightly north. The only question is whether you let personal cloud your judgment. Will you? Evelyn thought about Marcus Sullivan bleeding out in a ravine while she listened helplessly on the radio. Thought about the promise she had made over his unmarked grave. The vow that had driven her through 3 years of impossible missions. Thought about the nerve damage eating away at her abilities. The ticking clock that measured her remaining time in minutes and hours instead of years. No, she said. I'll be professional right up until I put a bullet in his head. Then I'll be personal. Emma almost smiled. Dad would have said the same thing. Your father was smarter than me. He would have found a way to avoid the situation entirely. But if he couldn't avoid it, then he'd do exactly what I'm doing. Run toward the sound of gunfire and trust his training to see him through. They crested a ridge, and the Ka-7 Valley spread below them like a map of hell. Smoke rose from multiple points, the black columns of burning vehicles marking where SEAL Team 9 had tried to establish defensive positions. Tracer fire stitched red lines across the fading daylight. Beautiful and deadly, the crump of mortar rounds punctuated the constant stutter of automatic weapons. Evelyn dropped her prone, her rifle coming up in one smooth motion. She scanned the valley through her scope, her enhanced vision processing tactical data faster than any computer. 9 blue-friendly icons clustered in a narrow ravine, surrounded by 47 red hostile positions. The math was brutal and simple. Her people were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Her radio crackled. Wrath-01, this is JSOC Actual. We're receiving emergency traffic from Team 9. They're requesting immediate extract. Casualties are critical. Tell them 12 minutes, Evelyn said, her voice utterly calm despite the chaos below. I'll be in position in 12 minutes. They may not have 12 minutes. Then I'll move faster. She lowered the rifle, turned to Emma. The girl was pale but composed, her jaw set with determination that was pure Marcus Sullivan. This is where we separate, Evelyn said. You're going to stay here. You're going to observe. You are going to learn, but you are not, under any circumstances, going to follow me down there. Clear. Emma opened her mouth to argue. That wasn't a request, Evelyn said, her voice carrying the steel of absolute command. That was an order. You wanted to understand what we do. Now you'll understand, but from here. From safety. Because if something happens to you, your father's sacrifice means nothing. Emma's eyes blazed with frustration and understanding, and something else. Pride, maybe. Or just recognition that she was being treated like an operator, trusted with the tactical picture, even if she could not participate in the tactical solution. I'll stay, Emma said. Good. Evelyn handed her a second radio. Channel 7, emergency frequency. If anything happens to me, you call Victor Kane. He'll extract you. Nothing's going to happen to you. Evelyn smiled, the expression showed in knowing. People always say that right before everything goes wrong. Now listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. She pulled Emma close, spoke quietly, urgently, pouring 3 years of grief and regret and hard-won wisdom into words she should have said long ago. Your father was the best man I ever knew. He taught me that being a warrior isn't about killing enemies. It's about protecting the people who can't protect themselves. It's about standing between the darkness and the light, even when it costs everything. He lived that truth every day of his life, and he died most living it. That's his legacy. That's what you carry forward. Emma's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. What's your legacy? Evelyn looked down at the valley, at the warriors dying in the gathering darkness, at the enemy forces moving in for the kill. She thought about the nerve damage that would eventually reduce her to civilian life, about the 18 months she had left at full capability, about the choice she had made 6 months ago in a hospital room overlooking the Potomac. I'm still writing it, she said, but I hope it's this. I hope someone remembers that I fought for the people who couldn't fight for themselves, that I finished what your father started, that I trained you to be better than either of us. You're not dying today, Emma said fiercely. No, Evelyn agreed, not today. Today I'm saving 9 Americans, and tomorrow I'm going to teach you how to do the same. But first I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Emma nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in her throat. Good. Evelyn stood, checked her rifle one final time, and prepared to become the thing that JSOC had made her. The impossible operator. The divine ghost. Wrath-01. Stay on this frequency. Watch everything. Learn everything. And Emma, whatever happens down there, whatever you see me do, remember this. Your father would have done the same thing. She disappeared over the ridgeline before Emma could respond, moving with inhuman speed across terrain that should have broken her ankles and shredded her knees, navigating loose scree and sharp rocks with the kind of precision that came from 8 years of pushing her body past every limit human physiology should allow. But Evelyn Blackwood was not quite human anymore, had not been since the Omega Ghost Division had taken a promising SEAL operator and turned her into something that existed between legend and nightmare, between the possible and the impossible. The descent was brutal. Every step sent jolts of pain through her deteriorating nervous system, warning signals that she ignored with practiced discipline. The nerve damage was getting worse. She could feel it in the slight delay between thought and action, in the way her fingers sometimes did not quite respond the way they should. But not today. Today she needed her body to perform one more time, to give her the capabilities that had made her Wrath-01, to be the weapon that JSOC had spent years forging. Behind her, Emma Sullivan watched through binoculars as the woman who had been her father's partner descended into hell to pull warriors back from death itself. The girl's hands were steady on the field glasses, despite the fear and awe warring in her chest. Her breathing controlled through conscious effort, her mind cataloging every movement, every tactic, every impossible thing that happened in the next 12 minutes. She was watching her future unfold, watching what she would become if she chose this path, watching the cost of service measured in blood and sacrifice, and the kind of loneliness that came from being able to do things other people could not imagine. Because Emma Sullivan was 16 years old, and she had just made a decision that would define the rest of her life, a choice she would never be able to unmake, no matter how much she might later wish she could. She would follow in her father's footsteps, would train with Evelyn Blackwood if the woman survived this mission, would become the next generation of guardians standing between darkness and light, between the innocent and those who would destroy them without mercy or hesitation. But first, she would watch, she would learn, and she would understand exactly what sacrifice looked like when executed with precision and purpose, by someone who had nothing left to lose except the people she had sworn to protect, who had made promises to the dead and intended to keep them no matter the cost. In the valley below, Evelyn Blackwood reached her firing position, a rocky outcrop that provided excellent sight lines and minimal cover, the kind of position that any sniper would recognize as tactically sound and strategically exposed. She settled behind her rifle with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed, decades of muscle memory compressed into seconds of perfect execution. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped, and the enhanced sensory training that Omega Ghost Division had burned into her neural pathways began processing the tactical environment with inhuman efficiency. Wind speed, 7 knots from the northeast, gusting to 9. Air temperature, 53 degrees Fahrenheit, and dropping as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. Barometric pressure, humidity, elevation difference between her position and potential targets. 1,000 variables that would determine whether this shot meant life or death for people she had never met but would die to protect. Americans fighting for their lives against an enemy that had them surrounded and outnumbered and outgunned. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow to 40 beats per minute, felt time itself seem to slow around her the way it always did in these moments. The world narrowed to the view through her scope, to the crosshairs that would determine who lived and who died in the next few seconds, to the trigger beneath her finger that held the power of judgment. This was what she had been made for. This was the purpose that justified 8 years of impossible missions. That explained the nerve damage eating away at her abilities. That made sense of Marcus Sullivan's death 3 years ago. She was the weapon that stood between American warriors and the darkness that wanted to consume them. She was Wrath-01. She was Divine Ghost. And 47 enemies were about to learn what that meant. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, a touch so gentle it barely registered. Years of training condensed into pressure measured in ounces. Her enhanced senses processed wind speed, air density, temperature, distance, elevation, 1,000 variables that would determine whether this shot meant life or death for the SEAL pinned down in that ravine, bleeding out while his teammates tried desperately to keep him alive. She exhaled slowly, let her heart rate drop to 40 beats per minute, felt time itself seem to slow around her the way it had during every mission, every impossible shot, every moment when everything balanced on the edge of a blade and could tip towards salvation or damnation based on decisions made in fractions of seconds. The enemy sniper was 2,143 meters away, barely visible even through her advanced optics, a ghost himself hidden among rocks that looked identical to 1,000 other rocks. But Evelyn could see him, could read the subtle differences in shadow and light, could calculate his exact position based on the angle of the sun and the patterns of heat shimmer rising from stone. One shot, one chance, one life hanging in the balance, and 9 more after that, and 47 enemies standing between her and the Americans who needed to go home to their families. The math did not work. It never worked. That was the point. That was why they called her when everything else had failed. when the numbers said defeat was inevitable and death was certain. Because Evelyn Blackwood specialized in making the impossible happen through force of will and perfect execution and a willingness to pay any price for American lives. Then she squeezed the trigger, and with steady pressure that came from thousands of hours of practice and hundreds of missions and 23 impossible victories, and 2,143 meters away, an enemy combatant's head snapped back as a 190-grain boat-tail hollow-point bullet traveling at 2,650 feet per second terminated his existence with surgical precision, penetrating his helmet and destroying the brainstem before his nervous system could even register the impact. Divine Ghost had entered the battlefield, and the war in Kasevan Valley had just shifted from hopeless to possible, from certain death to slim chance, from defeat to the razor's edge, where miracles happened or did not happen based on skill and determination, and the kind of commitment that could not be taught or trained, only lived and bled and died for. And someone, somewhere in that valley full of death and darkness and men fighting for their lives, had just run out of time and did not know it yet, did not understand that the woman descending the mountain with 31 bullets left, and a failing nervous system and a promise to Marcus Sullivan's ghost was about to change everything, about to turn their prepared ambush into their worst nightmare, about to show them what happened when America decided that some warriors were too valuable to lose and activated the protocol that existed for moments exactly like this. Wrath-01 was operational, Divine Ghost was hunting, and 47 enemies were about to become 46, then 45, then fewer still, subtracted from existence by mathematics that defied probability, in physics that bent to will, in a woman who had stopped being entirely human the day she decided that saving American lives mattered more than her own survival, more than her health, more than anything except keeping the promises she had made to the dead. The second shot came 37 seconds after the first, the interval measured not by any clock, but by the rhythm of death that Evelyn Blackwood had perfected over 8 years of impossible missions. 37 seconds to acquire the next target, to calculate wind drift and bullet drop across 2,000 meters of hostile airspace, to account for the slight tremor in her hands that no one else could detect, but that she felt like earthquake tremors in her failing nervous system. 37 seconds to become death itself, precise and implacable, and utterly without mercy. The mountains of Afghanistan held their breath in that interval, the eternal wind that scoured these peaks falling still as if nature itself paused to witness what came next. Dust hung suspended in the air, caught in the last rays of sunlight that painted the valley in shades of copper and blood. Somewhere in that valley, 9 American warriors fought for their lives against an enemy that had planned this ambush with meticulous care, that had studied American tactics and capabilities and designed a killing zone specifically calibrated to destroy SEAL Team 9. Somewhere in that same valley, 46 enemy combatants, who had been 47 less than a minute ago, were beginning to understand that their perfect ambush had just become imperfect, that a variable they had not accounted for had entered the tactical equation, that the mathematics of overwhelming force were being rewritten by someone who specialized in making impossible shots from impossible distances. The enemy drone operator never saw it coming. He was crouched behind a technical vehicle, a Toyota Hilux that had been modified with armor plating and a mounted heavy machine gun, the kind of improvised war machine that had become signature to conflicts across the Middle East and Central Asia. His attention was focused on the tablet in his hands that displayed real-time aerial surveillance from the quadcopter circling above SEAL Team 9's position at an altitude of 300 meters, high enough to be difficult to hear over the sound of gunfire, low enough to provide clear thermal imaging of American positions. The drone feed was how Black Serpent had maintained perfect intelligence on American movements, how they had coordinated their ambush with such devastating precision, how they had anticipated every tactical decision that Jackson Hayes and his team made. Every time the SEALs tried to maneuver, the drone spotted them. Every time they tried to establish a defensive position, mortar fire rained down on their heads with accuracy that suggested divine guidance rather than human calculation. Evelyn aimed not for the man, but for the tablet itself, for the antenna array that transmitted data between drone and operator, a small target made smaller by distance, by atmospheric distortion, by the heat shimmer rising from sun-baked stone. The target measured roughly 6 inches across at a range of 2,100 meters. The margin for error was measured in millimeters. Missed by an inch, and the shot accomplished nothing beyond wasting a bullet she could not afford to waste. Hit center mass, and the entire enemy's surveillance network collapsed, blind and confused, their technological advantage evaporating in sparks and shattered silicon. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. 2.5 seconds later, the tablet exploded in a shower of sparks and shattered electronics, fragments of circuit board and plastic embedding themselves in the operator's face. He screamed, clutching at his eyes, stumbled backward, and fell from the elevated position he had occupied. Blind and panicked, he tumbled down a rocky slope and landed in a twisted heap 30 feet below. The drone, suddenly without guidance or control signal, went into automatic hover mode for exactly 15 seconds before its fail-safe programming activated. Then it descended straight down and impacted the valley floor hard enough to scatter components across a 20-foot radius. Black Serpent had just lost their eyes in the sky. In the ravine where SEAL Team 9 fought for survival, Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle shot echoing across the valley, heard it again 30 seconds later, and felt something shift in the tactical situation, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the earth. The enemy fire that had been systematically working its way toward his position suddenly became erratic, confused, lacking the coordinated precision that had characterized the ambush. Mortar rounds that had been walking with mechanical accuracy toward his casualties now fell randomly, wasting ammunition on empty ground, suggesting that whoever was calling the shots had lost their eyes. Someone was shooting. Someone with capabilities that defied the normal parameters of battlefield engagement, that exceeded what training and experience should allow, that suggested either technology so advanced it bordered on science fiction or human capability enhanced to superhuman levels. Someone who could hit targets at distances that should have been impossible and do it with a precision that suggested either divine intervention or years of training in programs that officially did not exist. Hayes pressed himself against the ravine wall, his uniform soaked with blood that belonged to 3 different people, the fabric stiff and sticky and warm despite the cold mountain air. His hands shook slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion, from 30 minutes of sustained combat that had aged him a decade. He was 38 years old and had been leading men in combat for 15 years, had seen Fallujah and Ramadi and Kandahar, had lost friends and teammates and pieces of himself in places whose names most Americans could not pronounce. But he had never felt as helpless as he did right now, watching his team die by inches while an enemy he could not effectively engage systematically destroyed them from positions he could not reach. Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Carter lay on an improvised stretcher beside Hayes, chest bandaged with field dressings that were already soaked through with blood, his breathing shallow and wet, sounding like a man drowning on dry land. Sucking chest wound, collapsed lung, probable internal bleeding from the shrapnel that had torn through his body armor and fragmented inside his chest cavity. Without advanced medical care in the next 20 minutes, without a trauma surgeon in an operating room and blood transfusions measured in liters, Carter would drown in his own blood while his teammates watched helplessly. The young sailor was 23 years old, had been married for 2 years to his high school sweetheart, had twin daughters who had just turned 1 year old and who would grow up without a father if Hayes could not get him out of this valley alive. Carter had been telling everyone about his daughters 2 hours ago, showing pictures on his phone, talking about how they were starting to walk and say their first words. Now he was unconscious and fading, his life measured in minutes and shallow breaths. Petty Officer First Class Sarah Mitchell knelt beside Carter, her hands red to the elbows as she tried to maintain pressure on wounds that refused to stop bleeding no matter what she did. Her medical kit was almost empty, reduced to improvised solutions and desperate prayers, and the kind of battlefield medicine that worked in movies but failed in reality. She had used the last eye bag 15 minutes ago, had run through her entire supply of combat gauze, trying to pack wounds that just kept opening up, had done everything her training had taught her, and watched it prove inadequate against injuries this severe. Mitchell was 29 years old, had been a Navy corpsman for 8 years before earning her SEAL qualification, had saved lives in circumstances that should have been impossible. She was the kind of medic that warriors trusted absolutely, the kind who stayed calm when everything went to hell, who made decisions that meant life or death, with the casual confidence of someone who had done it 100 times before. But there was nothing calm about her now. Her jaw was clenched tight enough to hurt, her eyes red from dust and exhaustion and tears she refused to let fall. She knew Carter was dying, could read it in his vital signs and his color and the amount of blood that had soaked into the rocky ground beneath him. And she knew that admitting it out loud would be surrender, would be accepting defeat, would be failing in the fundamental mission that defined her as a medic. "Sir," Mitchell said quietly, not looking up from her patient, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite the desperation underneath. "He's not gonna make it. Not like this. He needs a trauma surgeon and a hospital and miracles we don't have. We're barely keeping him alive, and I don't know how much longer I can maintain even that." Hayes had nothing to say to that because she was right and they both knew it, because honesty was one of the few luxuries they could still afford when everything else had been stripped away by ambush and attrition. Ryan Carter was 23 years old, married with 2 kids back in Virginia Beach, a bright future ahead of him that was currently measured in minutes instead of years, in heartbeats instead of decades. And there was nothing Jackson Hayes could do except watch him die and add his name to the list of warriors lost under his command. The list that kept growing longer with every tour and every mission and every time he led men into harm's way. Then another shot cracked across the valley, followed by a body falling from a sniper position that had been making their lives hell for the past 20 minutes. An impossible shot at an impossible distance executed with surgical precision. "What the hell?" someone whispered. Petty Officer Second Class Tyler Brooks was pressed against the opposite wall of the ravine, his rifle empty, his face streaked with blood and cordite. He was 24 years old and had seen enough combat to age him a decade, but he had never seen anything like this. Bodies dropping from positions that should have been untouchable. Enemy communications going dark. The carefully coordinated ambush dissolving into chaos. "Ghost," Hayes said quietly. "It has to be." "Sir," Brooks said, "I served with someone years ago, before she went dark, before they made her into something else." Hayes checked his remaining ammunition, 7 rounds, and made his decision. If she's here, if they activated Wrath Protocol, then we've got a chance. We just need to hold long enough for her to work. What's Wrath Protocol? Something they don't talk about in briefings. Something they only use when everything else has failed and American lives are about to be lost. Hayes looked at his team, at the dead and dying, at the warriors who had followed his orders into this killing zone. "It's our guardian angel. And if the stories are true, she's never failed a mission." "There's a first time for everything," Mitchell said, her voice tight with exhaustion and despair. "Not today," Hayes replied with conviction he did not entirely feel. "Not on my watch." 300 meters above them, positioned on a rocky outcrop that provided perfect sight lines and minimal cover, Evelyn Blackwood was systematically dismantling Black Serpent's command structure with the cold efficiency of a surgeon removing cancer. Each shot was calculated not just for immediate effect, but for maximum disruption to enemy coordination and morale. Third shot, the enemy field commander, identified by his position and the hand signals he was giving to subordinates. He was partially concealed behind a boulder, exposing himself for only seconds at a time as he directed the assault on SEAL positions. Evelyn waited with inhuman patience, her finger resting lightly on the trigger, her breathing controlled to the point where her chest barely moved. When he leaned out to shout orders to a machine gun team, she fired through a gap in the rocks measuring exactly 8 centimeters wide. The bullet passed through the opening, deflected slightly off one rock surface at precisely the calculated angle, and struck him in the throat. He went down clutching his neck, blood fountaining between his fingers, his orders dissolving into wet gurgles that carried no tactical meaning. The machine gun team froze, uncertain, their chain of command suddenly severed. They looked to each other for guidance that none of them could provide. In that moment of hesitation, they became vulnerable, became targets instead of threats. Evelyn's fourth shot punched through the machine gunner's helmet. Fifth shot took his assistant gunner in the chest. The heavy weapon fell silent, its crew scattered in panic. She was changing the battlefield itself, rewriting the tactical equation from impossible to merely difficult, not through overwhelming force or superior numbers, but through precision application of violence to critical nodes in the enemy network. Kill the leaders, destroy the communications, eliminate the heavy weapons, create chaos where there had been coordination. This was what 8 years of Wrath Protocol missions had taught her. That sometimes one operator in the right place at the right time with the right capabilities could accomplish what entire platoons could not. That precision mattered more than power. That knowing which enemy to kill was more important than killing as many enemies as possible. Her radio crackled. "SEAL 9, this is Wrath 01. The voice was cold, clinical, utterly devoid of emotion. It cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Direction 041, 30 seconds, you'll have an opening. Move fast." Inside the ravine, Jackson Hayes' head snapped up. The voice was familiar in ways he could not quite place, memories from years ago surfacing through the fog of combat stress and exhaustion. "Who is this?" "Your extraction. 041, 30 seconds. Don't waste them." Hayes looked at his team. They were exhausted, wounded, nearly broken. 3 dead wrapped in ponchos, 4 wounded who could barely walk, 6 who could still fight but were down to their last magazines. This was what remained of SEAL Team 9 after 30 minutes of contact with an enemy who had planned this ambush with meticulous care. But they were still SEALs, still warriors, still Americans who refused to quit even when quitting was the logical option. "You heard the voice," Hayes ordered. "Torres, Brooks, get Carter on the litter. Everyone else, prepare to move. We're going out hot." "Sir, we don't even know if we can trust," Brooks started. 20 seconds, the cold voice interrupted. 19, 18. Hayes grabbed his rifle, checked his remaining ammunition one last time. "We're trusting the ghost. Let's move." At exactly 0 seconds, 4 enemy fighters who had been maneuvering to block the escape route died in rapid succession. The shots came so fast and from such unexpected angles that observers initially thought a squad had fired simultaneously. But it was just one shooter working with the mechanical efficiency that seemed almost supernatural, transitioning between targets faster than human reflexes should allow. SEAL Team 9 burst from the ravine in a fighting withdrawal that would have made their instructors proud. They moved with disciplined aggression, carrying their wounded, firing suppressing bursts at any enemy they saw. The path ahead, which had been impassable 30 seconds earlier, was now clear. Bodies marked the corridor of death that Evelyn had carved for them, each one placed with precision to create the maximum psychological impact on surviving enemies. They ran through that corridor, boots pounding on rocky ground, lungs burning in the thin mountain air. Behind them, Black Serpent forces tried to pursue, tried to re-establish their killing zone, tried to complete the ambush that had been so carefully prepared. Every attempt was met with precision fire that dropped commanders and heavy weapons operators first, creating chaos and disruption. Evelyn was not just shooting to kill, she was dismantling the enemy's command structure, destroying their coordination, turning an organized assault force into scattered individuals fighting their own private wars. Khalid al-Rahman watched from his command post 300 meters from the primary engagement zone, his weathered hands gripping binoculars so tightly his knuckles had gone white beneath skin darkened by decades under the Afghan sun. He was 52 years old, had fought Americans for 30 years, starting when he was barely more than a boy, facing Soviet occupation, had learned their tactics and their capabilities through blood and fire and hard-won experience purchased with the lives of men he had commanded and enemies he had killed. He had ambushed Delta Force teams in the mountains of Tora Bora and killed Green Berets in the streets of Kandahar, and evaded SEAL operations that should have ended his life a dozen times over. He had survived drone strikes and special operations raids and betrayals from within his own organization. He had seen brothers and sons and friends torn apart by American firepower, had buried pieces of his family in graves scattered across 3 provinces, had learned to hate with the kind of purity that came from loss measured in generations. His younger brother Rashid had died 3 years ago in this same valley, killed by an American operator during a raid that was supposed to be impossible, that was supposed to have failed based on every tactical calculation. Black Serpent had prepared perfect defenses, had anticipated every American tactic, had positioned forces to create overlapping fields of fire that should have torn the assault team apart. But 2 Americans had walked through those defenses like they were made of paper instead of steel and blood, had killed 37 of Khalid's best fighters in 20 minutes of close-quarters violence that defied belief, had accomplished their mission objective and escaped into darkness, leaving behind nothing except bodies and confusion and Rashid's corpse with a single bullet hole through his forehead. Khalid had studied the after-action reports, had interviewed survivors, had tried to understand how two operators could accomplish what should have required a platoon. The reports had been fragmentary and contradictory, filled with claims that sounded like fever dreams or propaganda. Shooters who move faster than human reflexes should allow. Tactics that anticipated enemy responses before they happened. Capabilities that exceeded anything in American training manuals. And one name that appeared in whispered conversations among fighters who had survived that night. Divine Ghost, the phantom operator who appeared from nowhere, killed with surgical precision, and vanished without leaving evidence of her existence beyond the bodies and the terror she induced in men who thought themselves beyond fear. Khalid had spent 3 years planning his revenge, 3 years building Black Serpent into an organization capable of challenging American Special Operations Forces on their own terms, 3 years waiting for another chance to face the warriors who had taken his brother. He had studied American tactics until he could predict their responses, had acquired weapons and equipment that matched their technological advantages, had trained fighters to standards that rivaled the best that JSOC could field. And now, finally, he had drawn them into a trap. SEAL Team 9, escorting civilians through his territory, walking into an ambush that should have ended with American bodies and a propaganda victory that would echo across the entire region. Everything had gone according to plan. The coordination had been perfect. The execution had been flawless. Until it was not. Until a single shooter started systematically destroying his carefully prepared ambush with shots that defied probability and physics and everything Khalid had learned about the limits of human capability. This was not normal combat. This was not the kind of engagement that could be predicted or countered through superior tactics and positioning. This was something else entirely, something that brought back memories of that night 3 years ago when Divine Ghost had killed his brother and escaped into darkness. But he had never seen anything like this. A single shooter systematically destroying a force of 47 veteran fighters with shots that defied probability and physics. This was not normal combat. This was something else entirely. He reached for his radio, keyed the emergency frequency that connected him to his most elite unit. The Ghost Hunters. 12 men who had killed 7 American Special Operations personnel in the previous 6 months. Specialists in counter-sniper warfare, in hunting the hunters, in turning the tables on operators who thought themselves untouchable. Find the shooter, Khalid ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command tempered by something else. Something that might have been fear. Kill anyone who can shoot like that. This is priority 1. Everything else is secondary. The Ghost Hunters deployed in a practice pattern, each 2-man team moving to establish overlapping fields of observation. They carried thermal scanners, acoustic detection systems, enough collective experience to track virtually any sniper. They had hunted American operators across 3 countries, had killed men who were supposed to be the best in the world at staying hidden. But Evelyn Blackwood was not any sniper. She had been trained by the best, had survived missions that killed everyone else, had been enhanced by programs that pushed human capability past every known limit. And now, with her nervous system failing and her time running out, she was distilled down to pure purpose. She was the weapon that JSOC had spent 8 years perfecting, operating at peak efficiency because she had nothing left to lose. She watched the Ghost Hunters deploy through to her scope, counted them, assessed their capabilities with the cold analysis of a grandmaster studying a chessboard. 12 specialists at ranges that would quickly close to close quarters combat. She had 3 rounds left in her current magazine, 2 more magazines in her vest, her sidearm with 3 full magazines, grenades, knife. Most snipers would have withdrawn at this point, would have maintained distance, would have picked them off from safety. Evelyn moved toward them instead. The first 2 Ghost Hunters died without knowing they were under attack. They had established a position behind a cluster of boulders, scanning distant ridge lines for thermal signatures, looking for the muzzle flash or heat bloom that would betray a sniper's position. They were focused on threats a kilometer away, running calculations based on the assumption that their enemy would fight at range. Evelyn approached from below, moving with absolute silence across ground that should have betrayed every footstep. She had learned to read terrain like other people read books, to find the exact placement for each step that would minimize sound, to control her breathing so that even in the thin mountain air, She made no more noise than a ghost passing through stone. 12 meters away. 10. 8. Neither man detected her presence until she was close enough to count their heartbeats, close enough to see the sweat on their necks, despite the cold evening air. She fired twice, both headshots, both instant kills. The suppressed rifle made sounds like branches breaking, sharp cracks that could have been anything in the complex acoustic environment of the mountains. Both men collapsed, their sophisticated equipment suddenly useless against an enemy who had closed inside their detection parameters. Evelyn was moving before their bodies finished falling, transitioning to her next position with fluid economy of motion. The remaining ghost hunters heard the shots, recognized them for what they were, turned toward the sound with weapons raised and training activated. They found nothing. She was already behind them, moving through their formation like smoke through a chain-link fence. The next pair died before they could raise the alarm. Evelyn came at them from an angle they had not anticipated, her rifle slung across her back, her knife in her hand. 8 inches of folded steel that had saved her life more times than she could count. That had taken lives in a dozen countries. That was as much a part of her as her trigger finger. She moved like a predator that had evolved specifically to kill humans, like something that understood warfare at a genetic level. The first man died when her blade entered the base of his skull, severing his brainstem with anatomical precision. He was dead before his nervous system could process the attack, before he could make any sound beyond a quiet exhalation. The second man managed to half-turn, managed to register movement in his peripheral vision, managed to start bringing his weapon around. Evelyn grabbed his rifle, twisted it out of his hands with a technique that broke 2 of his fingers, reversed it, and struck him across the throat with the stock. The impact crushed his larynx. He fell choking silently, drowning in air he could not breathe. 4 down in less than 90 seconds, 8 remaining. The ghost hunters were professionals. They adjusted their formation, tightened their spacing, began moving with greater caution. Radio chatter increased as they tried to coordinate, tried to predict where she would strike next, tried to apply their training and experience to hunting someone who fought like Evelyn fought. But caution could not save them from someone who had spent 8 years learning to turn every environmental factor into a weapon. She used the terrain like it was an extension of her own body, luring a 3-man team into a bomb crater where the acoustics made it impossible for them to locate the direction of her shots. 3 rounds, 3 kills, all within 4 seconds. The distinctive crack of her rifle echoing off crater walls in patterns that suggested shooters in multiple positions. She set a tripwire across a natural choke point using paracord from her kit and a fragmentation grenade with the pin pulled and spoon held in place by tension. Then she made noise, drew pursuers toward the trap, let them think they had found her. 2 more died in the explosion, their bodies torn apart by shrapnel in the confined space. The remaining 3 ghost hunters finally understood what they were facing. This was not a sniper. This was not even a special operations soldier operating at the peak of human capability. This was something else entirely. A predator who could engage at any range, who fought without fear or hesitation, who seemed to know where they would be before they arrived. "Fall back," their team leader ordered into his radio, his voice tight with something that might have been panic. "Fall back and regroup." Evelyn shot him through the radio itself. The bullet entered through the transmission antenna, traveled through the radio housing, and exited through his jaw in a spray of blood and shattered bone and broken teeth. He went down screaming, clutching at the ruin of his face. The last 2 broke and ran. Not a tactical withdrawal, but genuine panic, the kind that overcame even the best training when faced with an enemy that could not be predicted or countered or survived. They abandoned their wounded team leader, abandoned their equipment, abandoned everything except the desperate need to put distance between themselves and the woman who had killed 9 of their teammates in 11 minutes. Evelyn let them go. They were no longer a threat, no longer tactical factors in the equation. Killing them would waste ammunition and time, neither of which she could afford to squander. She stood slowly, her body aching from exertion and impacts she had barely registered during the fight. Her left shoulder was bleeding from a grazing wound she had not noticed receiving, probably shrapnel from the grenade. Her ribs hurt where she had slammed into a boulder during one of her rapid position changes. The tremor in her hands was more pronounced now, the nerve damage announcing itself through symptoms she could no longer ignore. But she was alive and 12 enemy specialists were dead or fleeing, and SEAL Team 9 was moving towards safety. She triggered her radio. SEAL 9, what's your status? Moving, Jackson Hayes responded, his voice tight with exertion and stress. But we're about to hit another roadblock. They've got forces massing at Checkpoint Delta. We won't make it through. Evelyn checked her ammunition. 7 rounds remaining in her rifle plus 2 full magazines. 49 rounds total. Her sidearm with 3 magazines gave her another 45 rounds. Grenades, knife, determination, and a failing nervous system. Keep moving, she said. I'll clear Delta. You're one person against, Hayes started. 12 minutes, Evelyn interrupted. Don't slow down. She heard him take a breath, heard him make the calculation that every officer made when dealing with operators like her. Trust the specialist or second guess based on incomplete information. Hayes had always been good at trusting his people. Roger that, Godspeed, Ghost. The radio went silent. Evelyn looked at the bodies scattered around her, evidence of what she had done in 11 minutes of close-quarters violence. Then she looked toward Checkpoint Delta, 3 kilometers distant, where Black Serpent forces had established their final defensive position between SEAL Team 9 and safety. She had killed 12 specialists. Now she needed to clear a fortified position held by forces unknown, probably 20 or more fighters with prepared defenses and interlocking fields of fire. She needed to do it in 12 minutes with ammunition that was barely adequate for a sustained firefight. The math did not work. It never did. Evelyn started moving toward Checkpoint Delta, her body protesting every step, but obeying anyway because she had spent 8 years training in it to function past the point where normal humans collapsed. Her enhanced senses cataloged the tactical environment automatically. Wind patterns, sound signatures, the distinctive smell of cordite and blood that marked recent combat. Behind her, in the rocky outcrop where she had left Emma Sullivan, with orders to observe and learn, the girl watched through binoculars as Evelyn disappeared into gathering darkness. Emma's hands were steady despite the fear and awe warring in her chest. She had watched Evelyn kill 12 men in 11 minutes, had seen impossible shots and close-quarters violence that belonged in action movies rather than real life. This was what her father had done. This was what Evelyn did. This was what Emma herself would become if she chose this path, if she followed through on the decision she had made. Emma reached for her radio, keyed the emergency frequency that connected her to Victor Kane. Uncle Victor, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. Something about what my father really did. Something about how he died. Because Tyler Brooks had said something during the chaos of SEAL Team 9's extraction, something that had carried over the radio channels. He had recognized Evelyn's voice, had remembered being 19 years old and pinned down in Fallujah with his Marine platoon getting torn apart by insurgent fire, had remembered a cold female voice on the radio giving him directions, telling him where to move, clearing his path with impossible shots from impossible distances, had remembered looking for his savior afterward and finding nothing except 3 unused rifle rounds arranged in a triangle on a flat stone, the signature of Divine Ghost. And now Tyler had heard that voice again, 5 years later, saving him for the second time. The same guardian angel who had pulled him back from death when he was barely old enough to vote was now doing it again, was saving his entire team, was walking toward impossible odds with the same cold determination she had shown half a decade ago. Emma had heard the recognition in Tyler's voice over the radio, had understood that Evelyn had been doing this for years, saving warriors who would never know her name, fighting battles that would never appear in official records, dying by inches so that others could live. And 3 years ago, Marcus Sullivan had died doing the same thing, had died in the same valley, fighting the same enemy, protecting the same kind of people, had made the same choice Evelyn was making now, to walk toward death so others could walk toward life. Victor Kane's voice came back over the radio, rough with emotion he did not try to hide. What do you need to tell me, sweetheart? Emma looked through her binoculars at the valley where Evelyn moved toward Checkpoint Delta, where 9 SEALs fought their way toward safety, where the ghost of Marcus Sullivan seemed to hover over everything like a benediction. I need to know the truth, Emma said, about how my father really died, about Operation Silent Thunder, about Khalid al-Rahman. All of it. No more classified mission deflections. No more lies to protect me. I'm 16 years old and I just watched a woman kill 12 men to save 9 Americans. I think I can handle the truth about my father. There was a long pause on the radio. Then Victor Kane sighed, the sound of a man who had been carrying secrets for too long and was relieved to finally put them down. Your father was the best man I ever served with, Kane said quietly, and he died like he lived, protecting someone who mattered, making the choice that good men make when there are no good choices left. Do you really want to hear this? Yes, Emma said. I need to understand what I'm choosing, what this life means, what it cost my father, what it's costing Evelyn right now. Then I'll tell you, Kane said, everything, starting with the night 3 years ago when Marcus Sullivan and Evelyn Blackwood walked into this same valley to kill Khalid al-Rahman, when everything went wrong, when your father made the choice that saved Evelyn's life and ended his own. And as Victor Kane began to speak, as he told the story that had been classified and buried and hidden from Emma for 3 years, she understood. She understood why her father had smiled in that photograph with Evelyn, why he had chosen this life despite knowing it would probably kill him, why Evelyn was walking towards certain death right now with the same calm determination her father had shown. Victor Kane's voice came through the encrypted radio with the weight of memory and grief, each word carefully chosen, each detail measured against the oath he had sworn to protect classified information, and the deeper oath he had sworn to Marcus Sullivan's memory to watch over his daughter. 3 years ago, Kane began, your father and Evelyn were assigned to Operation Silent Thunder. Their mission was to infiltrate a Black Serpent command compound in this same valley and eliminate or capture Khalid al-Rahman. Intelligence suggested that Khalid was planning a major offensive against American forces, something that could have killed hundreds of our people. Your father and Evelyn were the best we had. If anyone could pull off an impossible mission, it was them. Emma listened in silence, her hands gripping the binoculars so tightly her fingers ached, her eyes fixed on the valley below where Evelyn moved through darkness toward the same enemy who had killed her father. The same valley, the same mission. History repeating itself with terrible symmetry. They went in at night, Kane continued, his voice rough with emotion he did not try to hide. Just the two of them against 37 enemy fighters. The plan was to move fast, hit hard, get out before Black Serpent could organize a response. Your father was the assault element. Evelyn was Overwatch and extraction security. They'd worked together for 2 years by that point, knew each other's movements like dancers who'd rehearsed the same routine 1,000 times. What went wrong? Emma asked quietly. Everything and nothing, Kane said. They accomplished the mission, got into the compound, eliminated the targets, secured the intelligence they needed. But on the way out, Khalid's brother Rashid called in reinforcements faster than we anticipated, blocked their primary extraction route, forced them toward the Knife Edge Ravine, the same place where SEAL Team 9 is heading right now. Emma felt her breath catch. The Knife Edge. She had heard whispers about it during her tactical studies, a geological nightmare barely wide enough for a human body, walls that could collapse without warning, darkness so complete that night vision was useless. The kind of terrain that appeared in case studies about missions gone catastrophically wrong. Your father and Evelyn made it through the ravine, King continued, but when they came out the other side, Rashid was waiting with a dozen fighters, had them pinned down. No way forward, no way back, ammunition running low. They were about to be overrun. And your father? He made a choice. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. What choice? He told Evelyn to run, told her to take the intelligence and complete the mission. Then he charged the enemy position alone to buy her time to escape, drew all their fire onto himself, gave Evelyn the 30 seconds she needed to break contact and fade into the mountains. Did he know? Emma asked, her voice breaking. Did he know it would kill him? There was a long pause, then Kane said quietly, yes, he knew. Evelyn heard it all on the radio, heard him fighting, heard him running out of ammunition, heard him switch to his sidearm, then his knife, heard him die defending her escape route. His last words were for you, Emma. He said, tell Emma I loved her. Tell her I'm proud of her. Tell her to be better than me. Tears ran down Emma's face now, hot against skin chilled by mountain wind. She had spent 3 years believing her father died in a training accident, something random and meaningless, bad luck and worse timing. Learning that he had chosen to die, that he had made a conscious decision to sacrifice himself for his partner and his mission, changed everything. Evelyn tried to go back for him, Kane said, after she secured the intelligence and reached friendly lines. Tried to organize a recovery mission to bring your father's body home. But by the time we got back to the site, Black Serpent had already removed all evidence. We never found him, Emma. Never got to bring Marcus home. There's no grave because there's no body. Just a name on a memorial wall and a folded flag and a lie about training accidents. Why did you lie to me? Emma asked. Why not tell me the truth? Because your father made us promise, Kane replied. Made Evelyn promise that if anything happened to him, we'd tell you it was an accident. He didn't want you to grow up knowing he'd chosen to leave you. Didn't want you to carry the weight of his sacrifice. He wanted you to be a normal kid, to go to normal schools, to have a normal life. But I'm not a normal kid, Emma said, her voice strengthening. I'm Marcus Sullivan's daughter, and I'm tired of being protected from the truth about who he was and what he stood for. I know, Kane said gently. That's why I'm telling you now, because you're standing on a battlefield, watching Evelyn do the same thing your father did, walking toward death to save people she's never met, making the choice that good warriors make when there are no good choices left. And you need to understand what that means before you decide to follow in their footsteps. Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smearing dust and salt across her face. Through her binoculars, she could see Evelyn moving with purpose toward checkpoint Delta, could see the tactical situation developing, could read the mathematics that said one operator against unknown numbers in a fortified position was suicide. She's going to die, isn't she? Emma said. Just like my father died. Maybe, Kane admitted. Probably. The mission parameters exceed what anyone should be able to accomplish. But Evelyn has done the impossible 23 times before. She's Divine Ghost. She's the best we've ever produced. If anyone can pull this off, it's her. And if she can't, then she'll die trying. Because that's what Guardians do, Emma. They stand between the darkness and the light. They pay prices that normal people can't imagine. They make sacrifices that break them piece by piece until there's nothing left except the mission and the people they're protecting. Emma understood now. Understood the weight her father had carried, the choices he had made, the legacy he had left not in medals or commendations, but in the lives he had saved, and the warrior he had trained to carry on after he was gone. Evelyn was her father's legacy, and Emma herself was Evelyn's. Because some things mattered more than survival. Some promises had to be kept even when keeping them meant dying. Some people had to stand between darkness and light because no one else would, because the cost of walking away was higher than the cost of staying. Emma Sullivan was 16 years old, and she had just learned the most important lesson anyone could learn about service and sacrifice and the price that Guardians paid to keep innocents safe. Her father had paid that price 3 years ago in this same valley. Evelyn was paying it right now, and someday, if Emma chose this path, she would pay it too. But not today. Today she would watch and learn and understand. Today she would honor her father's memory by becoming worthy of his sacrifice, by understanding what he had died for and why it mattered. Tomorrow she would begin training to be the next Divine Ghost. Tomorrow she would take up the burden her father had carried and Evelyn was carrying now. Tomorrow she would become a guardian. But tonight she would pray. For Evelyn, for SEAL Team 9, for her father's soul, wherever it might be, for all the warriors who stood between darkness and light and paid the price so others did not have to. In the valley below, Evelyn Blackwood moved through darkness toward checkpoint Delta, toward the enemy forces that waited there, toward the final barrier between SEAL Team 9 and safety. She had 7 rifle rounds left. Her hands trembled slightly from nerve damage that was getting worse with each passing hour. She thought about Marcus Sullivan, about the promise she had made over his unmarked grave, about the debt she owed to a man who had saved her life by giving his own. 12 minutes, she had told Jackson Hayes, 12 minutes to clear a fortified position. She would need exactly 11, because Divine Ghost had never failed a mission. And she was not about to start now, not when 9 Americans needed to go home to their families, not when Emma was watching and learning what it meant to be a guardian. Khalid al-Rahman stood at checkpoint Delta, watching his forces prepare for the Americans who would soon arrive. He did not know that the woman who had killed his brother 3 years ago was currently moving through the darkness toward him. Did not know that his carefully planned ambush had been systematically dismantled by a single operator. Did not know that in 11 minutes his world would end in fire and blood, and the cold precision of someone who had learned to be merciless in service of mercy. Evelyn reached the perimeter of checkpoint Delta and began her final approach. Her mind already 3 steps ahead, already calculating angles and probabilities, and the exact sequence of actions that would turn impossible into inevitable. The math still did not work. But math had never stopped her before. Evelyn Blackwood studied Checkpoint Delta through her rifle scope, her enhanced vision processing tactical data with the cold efficiency of a computer calculating probabilities of death. The scope's reticle swept across fortifications that represented weeks of careful preparation, months of tactical planning, years of experience fighting American forces in these same mountains. The enemy had chosen their ground well, had learned from past defeats, had adapted to counter the tactics that had given American Special Operations Forces such devastating advantages. A natural choke point where the valley narrowed to barely 300 meters across, flanked on both sides by sheer rock faces that rose 200 feet toward a sky already darkening with the approach of night. Those rock faces channeled any approaching force into a kill zone designed with brutal elegance, with the kind of attention to detail that separated professional soldiers from simple militants. Every angle had been calculated. Every field of fire had been overlapped to eliminate dead space. Every potential approach had been covered by interlocking positions that would shred any assault force before they closed to effective engagement range. 43 enemy combatants, her count confirmed through careful observation over the past 8 minutes, cross-referenced and with thermal signatures and movement patterns that spoke to training and discipline far above average insurgent capabilities. 2 heavy machine gun positions with interlocking fields of fire, the weapons mounted on reinforced tripods that suggested sustained defensive operations and rather than mobile tactics. 3 RPG teams positioned to destroy any vehicle attempting passage, their launchers modern Russian models that could penetrate any armor the Americans might deploy. Mortar crews with pre-registered coordinates that would rain high explosive death on anyone caught in the open, their weapons already laid in and ready to fire on command. Sniper teams on elevated positions with clear sight lines covering every approach, their positions marked by the telltale signatures of disciplined marksmen who knew how to remain motionless for hours, who understood that patience was as much a weapon as ammunition. Radio operators maintaining communications between dispersed elements, coordinating a defensive network that functioned like a single organism with many eyes and many hands. And in the center of it all, standing beside a technical vehicle with the casual confidence of a man who had planned this ambush down to the smallest detail, Khalid al-Rahman. Even at this distance of nearly 800 meters, even through the gathering darkness that softened edges and blurred details, Evelyn recognized him from intelligence photos that she had studied until his face was burned into her memory. Recognized him from the nightmares that had plagued her for 3 years, the ghost that haunted every quiet moment, the enemy who represented everything unfinished about Operation Silent Thunder. The man who had killed Marcus Sullivan, the man whose brother she had killed during that same operation, the enemy who had turned this valley into a graveyard for American hopes, who had spent 3 years building Black Serpent into an organization capable of challenging JSOC on their own terms, who had been waiting for another chance to face the warriors who had bloodied his forces and escaped into darkness. Khalid stood with the bearing of a career soldier, shoulders straight despite the weight of decades spent at war, hands steady as he gestured to subordinates and issued orders that Evelyn could not hear but could read in the responses of fighters who moved with disciplined urgency. He was 52 years old according to his intelligence file, had been fighting since the Soviet occupation when he was barely more than a boy, had learned warfare from Russian Spetsnaz and later from Arab foreign fighters who had brought jihadi ideology and modern tactics to Afghanistan's eternal conflicts. He had survived American drone strikes and special operations raids and betrayals from within his own organization. He had built Black Serpent from fragments of defeated Taliban units and disillusioned militants who had grown tired of leaders more interested in ideology than victory. He had created an army that Americans took seriously, that JSOC tracked with the same attention they gave to more famous terrorist organizations, that had killed enough American personnel to earn designation as a priority target. And now he stood in the kill zone he had prepared, waiting for SEAL Team 9 to walk into his trap, believing that victory was inevitable because the mathematics favored him so completely. 43 fighters against 9 exhausted Americans, superior position against desperate flight, prepared defenses against chaotic retreat. He did not know that the equation had already changed, did not know that Divine Ghost had entered the battlefield, did not know that the woman he had been hunting for 3 years was currently studying him through a rifle scope, calculating angles and distances and the precise sequence of shots that would dismantle his perfect ambush. Her radio crackled with Jackson Hayes' voice, tight with controlled urgency. "Ghost, this is SEAL 9. We're 2 clicks from checkpoint Delta. Scouts report heavy fortification. Request alternate route." Evelyn keyed her radio, her voice carrying the flat affect of someone who had moved beyond fear into pure tactical calculation. "SEAL 9, your only alternate is back the way you came. Straight into enemy forces who are regrouping and hunting you. Forward is your only option." "Forward gets us killed," Hayes replied. "We don't have the firepower to breach that position, not with 4 wounded and ammunition critical." "You won't be breaching it," Evelyn said. "I will, but you need to trust me on route selection." "What route?" "The Knife Edge Ravine. Starts 1 click north of your current position. Comes out 500 meters east of checkpoint Delta, behind their primary defensive line." And yes, behind their... The radio went silent for a long moment. When Hayes spoke again, his voice carried disbelief that bordered on horror. "The Knife Edge is suicide. That ravine is barely wide enough for a man. 1 collapse and we're all buried alive. No one survives the Knife Edge." "I have," Evelyn said quietly. 3 years ago, with your predecessor in this valley." Hayes understood immediately. "Marcus Sullivan. You went through with Marcus." "Yes. He knew the route, mapped the safe passage. It's in the mission files, classified above your clearance level. But I'm authorized to use that intelligence to save American lives." "Marcus died here," Hayes said, his voice soft with realization. "In this valley. Fighting these same people." Evelyn felt the words like bullets impacting body armor. The kind of hits that did not penetrate, but bruised deep enough to leave marks that never quite faded. "Yes, he died so I could escape with mission-critical intelligence. He died buying me time to fade into the mountains. He died in the place where I'm about to send you, so you need to understand that I don't make this recommendation lightly. If you made it through once, why do you think we can make it through now?" "Because Marcus Sullivan was the best tactical navigator I ever worked with. Because he spent 2 hours mapping every meter of that ravine while we hid from enemy patrols. Because his last act before he died was uploading that data to JSOC servers so that if anyone ever needed to use that route again, they would have the information required to survive it." Hayes was silent, processing this information, weighing impossible choices against worse alternatives. Finally, he said, "How long to transit?" 37 minutes if you move carefully. 28 if you push hard. I recommend pushing hard." "Why?" "Because I need you clear of that ravine before I assault checkpoint Delta. Once I engage, Khalid will realize he's been flanked. He'll send forces to block the eastern exit. If you're still in the ravine when that happens, you're trapped." Hayes made his decision with the speed that separated good officers from dead ones. "Roger that. Transmitting our current coordinates now. Guide us in." "Stand by," Evelyn said. She was already moving, descending from her observation position with controlled speed that ate up distance while minimizing noise. Her body protested every step, nerve damage sending sporadic signals of numbness and pain that she cataloged and ignored. Not now, not when 9 American warriors needed her functioning at full capacity for just a little longer. She reached the rendezvous point in 8 minutes, emerging from shadows like a ghost materializing from darkness itself. SEAL Team 9 was arrayed in a defensive perimeter, weapons oriented outward, wounded in the center. They looked like they had been through a meat grinder, uniforms shredded and blood-soaked, faces hollow with exhaustion and sustained combat stress. Jackson Hayes stood when Evelyn appeared, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the woman who had saved his team. She was smaller than he expected, lean and compact, moving with the fluid grace that came from years of training and natural athleticism. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tactical braid, her face partially concealed by a black mask, her eyes a cold blue that seemed to process everything and reveal nothing. "Divine Ghost," Hayes said. "After all these years, I finally get to meet the legend." "Save the introductions," Evelyn replied. "We're on a timeline. Where's your critical casualty?" Sarah Mitchell gestured to Ryan Carter, still unconscious on his improvised stretcher. "He's got maybe 20 minutes before we lose him. Collapsed lung, internal bleeding, shock. I've done everything I can with field medicine." Evelyn knelt beside Carter, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she assessed his condition. She had been a medic before she had been a sniper, before JSOC had recruited her for Omega Ghost Division, before 8 years of impossible missions had transformed her into something between warrior and weapon. The skills remained, buried under layers of tactical training, but still accessible when needed. She pulled a compact medical kit from her vest, extracted a chest decompression needle that was far more advanced than anything Mitchell had access to. "Hold him steady." "What are you doing?" Mitchell asked. "Buying him an hour. Maybe 2 if we're lucky." Evelyn performed the procedure with steady hands despite the tremors she could feel in her fingers, releasing pressure that was slowly suffocating Carter from the inside. His color improved marginally, his breathing easing from desperate gasps to something closer to sustainable respiration. "That should stabilize him for transit," Evelyn said, standing. "But he needs a hospital, real surgeons, blood transfusions, everything we don't have here." "Then let's get him somewhere that does," Hayes said. "Show us this ravine." They moved through darkness toward the knife edge, 9 SEALs and 1 ghost, carrying their wounded and their dead, and the weight of survival measured in minutes and meters. Evelyn led from the front, her enhanced senses processing the terrain with precision that exceeded night vision technology. She could hear the slight variations in wind patterns that indicated open spaces or constricted passages ahead, could feel the subtle temperature changes that marked geological formations, could navigate by sound and touch and spatial awareness that bordered on supernatural. The entrance to the knife edge ravine appeared without warning. A vertical crack in the rock face that looked too narrow to accommodate a human body, that seemed to reject the very possibility of passage. Darkness pooled within it like liquid shadow, absolute and impenetrable, the kind of darkness that existed before the invention of light itself, before humans had discovered fire and driven back the night that had ruled the earth since the beginning of time. The ravine opening measured barely 80 centimeters across at its widest point, narrowing to less than 60 centimeters in places that Evelyn remembered from her previous transit. The rock faces on either side rose vertically for 20 meters before angling back, creating a slot canyon so deep and narrow that sunlight never reached the bottom, that had remained in perpetual twilight since geological forces had split the mountain millennia ago. Water had carved this passage over countless centuries, erosion working grain by grain to separate stone that had once been solid, creating a path that wound through the mountain's heart like a vein carrying blood through living tissue. But the water was long gone, diverted by earthquakes or climate shifts that had happened before recorded history, leaving only the passage behind as evidence of forces that humans could barely comprehend. Local Afghans avoided the knife edge, told stories about it in whispers, claimed that spirits lived in its depths and that anyone who entered emerged changed if they emerged at all. American military planners had marked it as impassable on their maps, classified it as natural obstacle equivalent to cliff faces or crevasses too wide to bridge. No one used the knife edge because using it was suicide, because the risk exceeded any possible tactical advantage. No one except Marcus Sullivan, who had mapped it while bleeding from shrapnel wounds and running from enemies who wanted him dead, who had spent 2 hours documenting every twist and turn while Evelyn provided security, who had uploaded that data to JSOC servers with his last functional radio, ensuring that if he died, his final act would be creating a tactical advantage for warriors who came after him. "This is it," Evelyn said, her voice carrying quiet authority that cut through the fear she could feel radiating from SEAL Team 9. "Single file. Maintain physical contact with the person ahead of you. No lights, no sound. I'll navigate and call out obstacles. Trust me completely or don't enter at all. But understand that if you don't trust me, if you turn back now, you're walking into enemy forces that are hunting you, forward through darkness or backward toward death. Those are your only choices." Tyler Brooks stared into that darkness, his young face pale with something between fear and awe, his hands trembling slightly despite his attempts to maintain tactical composure. He was 24 years old and had survived Fallujah and Kandahar and a dozen other battlefields that had tested him in ways that most humans would never experience. He had faced enemy fire and IEDs in situations that should have killed him multiple times over. But he had never faced anything like this. Never been asked to walk into absolute darkness through a passage that might collapse at any moment, trusting completely in the voice of a woman he had met less than an hour ago, betting his life on capabilities that sounded more like supernatural powers than enhanced training. "Ma'am," Brooks asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the fear underneath, "how do you navigate in there without light? How do you know where the walls are, where the obstacles are hidden, where the passage goes when you can't see anything at all. I listen, Evelyn said simply, as if this explained everything, as if echolocation was a skill that anyone could learn if they just tried hard enough. Sound behaves differently in confined spaces. It bounces off walls, reflects at angles that depend on the geometry of the passage. I can hear those echoes, read the acoustic signature like other people read maps. My brain processes the timing between sound generation and echo return, builds a mental map of the passage in real time. It's part of the enhanced training, part of what makes me useful for missions like this. What training program teaches you to echolocate like a bat? Brooks asked, genuine curiosity overcoming tactical discipline. What kind of enhancement gives you capabilities that sound like they belong in science fiction rather than military operations? The kind that doesn't officially exist, Jackson Hayes cut in, his voice carrying the weight of command and the implicit order to stop asking questions that had no answers that could be shared. The kind that takes promising operators and pushes them past every known limit of human performance. The kind that creates weapons like Divine Ghost. Now stow the questions, Tyler. We're running out of time, and this woman has saved our lives 3 times already tonight. She's earned our trust. Evelyn turned to face the team, and for a moment her mask slipped enough for them to see past the tactical exterior to something vulnerable beneath. Something human that still existed despite 8 years of missions that should have burned it away. 3 years ago, I went through this ravine with a man who was the best partner I ever had. He mapped this route while wounded and pursued, documented every hazard and obstacle, uploaded the data so others could survive what we barely survived ourselves. He died less than an hour after we emerged on the other side, died holding off enemies so I could escape with mission-critical intelligence, died so that future operators would have the tactical advantage his sacrifice created. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over them. I will not let his sacrifice be wasted by losing any of you in the darkness. I will guide you through safely because that's what he would have done, because that's what Guardians do. We protect the people who come after us. We create paths through impossible terrain so others don't have to die finding those paths themselves. Trust me. Follow my voice. Move when I tell you to move, and stop when I tell you to stop. We will all emerge on the other side. The conviction in her voice was absolute, the kind of certainty that could not be faked or manufactured, that came only from someone who had done the impossible and knew she could do it again. SEAL Team 9 looked at each other, saw their own fear reflected in teammates' eyes, saw also the determination that defined them as warriors, the refusal to quit that had been beaten into them through years of brutal training. Hayes made the decision for all of them. We follow Ghost. No questions, no hesitation. She leads, we follow. Clear. A chorus of quiet affirmatives. Hoo-yah, Roger, copy. Evelyn entered the ravine before anyone could reconsider, disappearing into blackness so complete it seemed to swallow her whole, to erase her from existence as thoroughly as death itself. Hayes hesitated for only a moment, then followed, one hand on Evelyn's shoulder, trusting his life to a woman he barely knew, but whose reputation preceded her like gospel truth, like articles of faith that required no evidence beyond the testimony of warriors who had survived impossible situations because Divine Ghost had answered their desperate calls. The ravine closed around them like a fist, rock walls so close that shoulders scraped against stone with every step. The darkness was total, absolute, the kind that made eyes useless and forced reliance on other senses. Evelyn's voice became their lifeline, quiet and steady, calling out obstacles with precise timing. Step down 30 centimeters. Duck, overhead clearance 1.4 meters. Angle left, passage narrows to 80 centimeters. Bear, right, loose rock at 2 o'clock. They moved through the earth like a chain of souls crossing between worlds, each warrior maintaining contact with the one ahead, trusting completely in the voice that guided them through impossible terrain. Time lost meaning in the darkness. Minutes stretched into hours or compressed into seconds, measured only by the rhythm of breathing and the scrape of boots on stone. Sarah Mitchell carried Ryan Carter's stretcher with Tyler Brooks, the weight awkward in the confined space. Every step a prayer that they would not drop him, would not stumble, would not fail the young sailor who depended on them for survival. Behind them, the rest of SEAL Team 9 followed with the discipline that defined their training, moving through hell because moving forward was the only option that mattered. Evelyn navigated by sound and memory and something else, something she could not quite explain even to herself. She could feel Marcus Sullivan's ghost walking beside her in the darkness, could almost hear his voice calling out hazards the way he had 3 years ago when they had fled through this same passage with enemy forces in pursuit. He had saved her life in this ravine by mapping the route even while wounded, even while knowing he would not survive the mission, even while preparing for the sacrifice that would define his legacy. Left here, Evelyn called. Tight squeeze, narrow to 70 centimeters. Turn sideways and slide through. Behind her, Hayes relayed the instruction down the line. Voice to voice, touch to touch, a human chain threading through stone that seemed determined to crush them. The ravine narrowed until it felt like the mountain was actively trying to reject them, to squeeze them back out like foreign objects that did not belong in the Earth's dark heart. Evelyn felt the walls pressing in, felt her breathing want to accelerate toward panic, felt the darkness trying to overwhelm the discipline that 8 years of impossible missions had burned into her psyche. And then she felt something else, a hand on her shoulder, but not Jackson Hayes' hand, a touch that was memory and comfort and the presence of someone who had walked this path before. Marcus, she whispered, too quiet for anyone behind her to hear. The ghost of Marcus Sullivan did not answer in words, but Evelyn felt guidance nonetheless, felt the certainty that had defined her partner's tactical decisions, felt the confidence that had made him the best operator she had ever known, felt the love that had motivated his final sacrifice. She moved forward with a renewed purpose, calling out obstacles with unwavering precision, leading 9 warriors through darkness that should have killed them all. 20 minutes into the transit through hell that measured time in heartbeats and careful steps, Ryan Carter stopped breathing. His heart simply gave up, exhausted from blood loss and trauma and the sustained stress of combat that had pushed his young body past every limit it should have been able to endure. Sarah Mitchell felt it immediately, her medic's instincts screaming alarm before her conscious mind could process the information that her hands were delivering through touch alone in the absolute darkness. No pulse beneath her fingers pressed against Carter's carotid artery. No chest rise against her arm draped across his torso. No breath sounds when she leaned close enough to feel his exhalations. The terrible stillness that meant death had arrived silently and without ceremony. "He's coding," Mitchell said, her voice tight with controlled panic that threatened to break through years of professional discipline. "I need to stop and do CPR. I need space and time and light. I need things we don't have in this nightmare passage through solid rock." "Negative," Evelyn's voice came back instantly, cold and absolute, carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument and allowed no discussion. "Keep moving. Don't stop. I'll handle it." "We can't just let him die," Mitchell protested, her voice rising despite her attempts to maintain tactical discipline. "He's 23 years old with a wife and 2 babies back home. He has everything to live for. I can't just carry him through this darkness while he dies. I won't." "You're not letting him die," Evelyn's voice carried back from somewhere ahead in the darkness. "Already moving, already repositioning, already preparing to do something that should have been impossible. You're trusting me to save him. You're doing your job, which is carrying that stretcher and maintaining forward progress. My job is keeping him alive. Now move and let me work." Mitchell wanted to argue, wanted to insist on stopping, wanted to do CPR herself because that was her responsibility and her training and her entire purpose as a combat medic. But something in Evelyn's voice stopped the protest before it could fully form. Not just authority, but certainty, the kind of absolute confidence that came from having done the impossible so many times that it no longer felt impossible. Evelyn dropped back through the line with speed that should have been impossible in the confined space and absolute darkness, her body navigating the narrow passage in reverse with the same precision she had shown going forward. She moved through gaps that barely accommodated human shoulders, squeezed past warriors who pressed themselves against rock walls to give her room, descended through vertical drops that required feeling with her feet for purchase points she could not see. She reached Carter's stretcher in under 20 seconds, her hands finding his chest in the absolute darkness through touch and spatial awareness that exceeded anything normal humans could achieve. She began compressions immediately, 30 steady pushes delivered with perfect rhythm despite the confined space and awkward angles, in the fact that she was performing emergency medicine while essentially blind. 30 compressions, each one deep enough to compress the chest 5 centimeters, deep enough to generate artificial circulation that might keep his brain alive for a few more minutes. The kind of CPR that broke ribs to save lives, that prioritized effectiveness over comfort, that acknowledged the brutal reality that dead people did not care about broken bones. Then she sealed her mouth over his in the darkness, breathed for him, forced oxygen into lungs that had stopped working on their own. 2 rescue breaths delivered with the clinical precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times in training and dozens of times in combat situations that made training seem like a pleasant dream. Again, 30 compressions delivered while moving, while Tyler Brooks and Sarah Mitchell continued carrying the stretcher forward through the ravine because Evelyn had ordered them not to stop. 2 breaths, mechanical and precise, and utterly focused on the singular purpose of restarting a heart that had decided it was finished beating. Tyler Brooks held the other end of the stretcher, feeling the woman working to resurrect his teammate in darkness, so complete he could not see his own hands even when he held them inches from his face. He wanted to help, wanted to do something useful, wanted to be more than just a handle on a stretcher while someone else performed miracles. "Keep moving," Evelyn said between compressions, her voice steady despite the physical exertion of performing CPR while walking backward through terrain that challenged every step. "Don't stop. Don't slow down. I can work and walk. I can do both because I've done both before, because this is what enhanced training means. Now move." "How?" Brooks asked, genuine confusion overcoming tactical discipline. "How can you do CPR while walking backward in complete darkness through a passage you've only been through once before? How is that physically possible?" "Because I've done this before," Evelyn said, delivering another set of compressions with metronomic precision. "Because Marcus Sullivan taught me to do impossible things in impossible conditions 3 years ago when we fled through this same passage with him bleeding from shrapnel wounds and me carrying him on my back for the last kilometer because he couldn't walk anymore. Because I will not lose anyone today. Not after he died to map this route. Not after he sacrificed himself so others could survive. Now move and let me save your teammate." They moved, the entire team continuing through the ravine while Evelyn performed CPR on a stretcher carried by warriors who could not see where they were going, who trusted completely in the voice that had not failed them yet, who had abandoned normal human limitations and entered a state where the only thing that mattered was following orders and completing the mission. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of thing that made Divine Ghost a legend, that created stories of warriors told in quiet moments, that separated special operations mythology from special operations reality. After 90 seconds that felt like hours, after 3 full cycles of compressions and breaths delivered while navigating through hell, Ryan Carter gasped. His heart restarted with a flutter that strengthened into steady rhythm, muscle memory taking over where conscious control had failed. His lungs drew air on their own, shallow and pained but sufficient to sustain life, to keep oxygen flowing to a brain that had been minutes away from permanent damage. "He's back," Evelyn said, her voice carrying a satisfaction that was almost medical in its detachment. "Keep moving, we're halfway through. His heart's beating, but it's weak. He needs that hospital sooner rather than later. So move faster." The revelation hit Tyler Brooks like a physical force, like the overpressure wave from an explosion that knocked the breath from lungs and left ears ringing. She just brought him back from death, performed CPR while walking backward through a ravine in complete darkness, while guiding the rest of us through terrain that could kill us at any moment. Did it like it was routine, like she does this kind of thing every day. What the hell is she? What did they make her into? "She's Divine Ghost," Jackson Hayes said quietly from somewhere ahead in the darkness, his voice carrying respect that bordered on reverence. "She's what happens when the best operators get enhanced training and 8 years of impossible missions and capabilities that push the limits of what humans can do. She's what we all wish we could be, what we all hope we'll never have to become." They emerged from the knife-edge ravine 31 minutes after entering, stumbling into open air that felt like resurrection, like being born again into a world of stars and wind and space enough to breathe without stone-crushing lungs. Every warrior collapsed immediately, gasping, trembling with exhaustion and relief in the aftermath of terror sustained and overcome. Every warrior except Evelyn. She stood at the ravine exit, scanning the terrain with her rifle scope, already processing the tactical situation that awaited them. Checkpoint Delta was 500 meters west. Khalid's forces were oriented toward the main approach, their backs exposed to this position. She had maybe 10 minutes before enemy scouts detected SEAL Team 9's emergence. Hayes pulled himself upright with visible effort, his legs shaking from the transit through hell they had just survived. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. And I've been a SEAL for 15 years. It gets easier, Evelyn said, the second time. How many times have you done it? Twice. Once with Marcus 3 years ago when we were running for our lives. Once just now with all of you. And I hope I never have to do it again because that ravine took something from me both times. What did it take? Hope, Evelyn said quietly. The belief that there are places humans are meant to go and places we're not. We just violated natural law by surviving that passage. The universe will collect payment eventually. Before Hayes could respond, Evelyn's radio crackled. Not her encrypted military channel, but something else. A frequency she had given to only one person. Evelyn, Emma Sullivan's voice came through, young and urgent and afraid. I found something in Dad's files. Something about the knife edge. Something he wanted you to know. Evelyn felt her heart rate spike, felt the tremor in her hands intensify, felt the nerve damage that had been manageable suddenly announce itself through symptoms she could not ignore. Not now, not when she needed to be fully operational for the assault on Checkpoint Delta. Emma, this is not the time. He knew, Emma said, her voice breaking. He knew he was going to die. He left a message. For you. Recorded the night before Operation Silent Thunder. I just found it in his personal files that Uncle Victor gave me. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling Marcus Sullivan's ghost standing beside her in the darkness, feeling the weight of 3 years of grief and guilt and promises kept to the dead. What did he say? Emma's voice was thick with tears. He said, if you're hearing this, Evelyn, it means I didn't make it back. It means I made the choice we both knew I'd make if it came down to you or me. I don't regret it. You're the future. You're what comes after warriors like me. Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll train the next generation. Promise me you'll teach my daughter what it means to be a guardian. The words hit Evelyn like artillery rounds, each one detonating against defenses she had built over 3 years, each one exposing wounds that had never quite healed. Marcus had known, had predicted his own death, had accepted it as the price of partnership and mission accomplishment, had trusted Evelyn to carry on without him. I'm trying, Evelyn whispered into the radio. I'm trying to keep that promise, Marcus. I'm trying to be what you believed I could be. He also said, Emma continued, that the knife edge has a weakness, a place where Khalid's forces never patrol because they think it's inaccessible. Eastern exit, 20 meters north, elevated position. Perfect overwatch for Checkpoint Delta. He scouted it during your escape 3 years ago, marked it as tactical advantage for future operations. Evelyn's tactical mind seized on this information, processing it with the speed that had kept her alive through 23 impossible missions. An overwatch position that enemy forces did not monitor. High ground with clear sight lines to Khalid's command post. The perfect location to begin her assault. Emma, she said, you just gave me the edge I needed. Thank your father for me. Tell him yourself, Emma replied, when you see him again. And Evelyn, she paused, her young voice carrying weight beyond her years. Come back alive, because I need you to teach me what my father wanted you to teach me. I need you to show me how to be a guardian. Evelyn felt something crack in her chest, felt emotion she had suppressed for 3 years threatening to overwhelm tactical discipline. I'll come back, I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep, Emma said. My father did that. It didn't end well. Then I'll make a different promise, Evelyn said. I promise to fight with everything I have. I promise to honor your father's sacrifice. I promise that if I die today, it will be doing what he trained me to do. Protecting warriors who need protecting. Being the guardian he believed I could be. That's enough, Emma said quietly. That's all I needed to hear. Good hunting, Ghost. The radio went silent. Evelyn stood motionless for a moment, processing everything that had just happened, everything Emma had revealed, everything Marcus had predicted 3 years ago. He had known he would die, had accepted it, had planned for it, had left instructions for the student who would carry on his legacy. And now that student was watching from a mountain overlook, learning what it meant to be a warrior, preparing to walk the same path that had killed her father and was slowly killing Evelyn. Jackson Hayes approached quietly, respecting the moment but needing answers. "Ghost, what's the plan?" Evelyn turned to face him, and Hayes saw something in her eyes that made him understand why men called her Divine Ghost. There was nothing human in that gaze, nothing soft or vulnerable or afraid. Only cold purpose and absolute determination and the certainty of someone who had made peace with death and no longer feared it. "The plan is simple," Evelyn said. "You take your team and continue east to the extraction point. Keep Carter alive, get everyone home. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that SEAL Team 9 survived because warriors refused to quit. What about you? I'm going to that Overwatch position Marcus scouted 3 years ago. I'm going to eliminate Khalid al-Rahman and anyone who tries to stop me. I'm going to create enough chaos that you can escape without pursuit." And then, Evelyn paused, her voice carrying finality that made Hayes understand this was goodbye. "Then I'm going to finish what Marcus started." Hayes wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she come with them, wanted to save the woman who had saved his team. But he had been an officer long enough to recognize when orders were not up for debate. "How long do we have?" 12 minutes from my first shot. Move fast, don't look back." In Hayes, she met his eyes with intensity that was almost painful. "Tell Emma Sullivan that her father was proud of her. Tell her I kept my promise. Tell her she's going to be better than both of us." Hayes nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in his throat. He gathered his team with hand signals, began moving them toward the extraction point that lay 3 kilometers east. They moved like ghosts themselves, silent and swift, carrying their wounded and their dead, and the knowledge that they owed their lives to a woman who was about to sacrifice herself so they could live. Tyler Brooks was the last to leave. He looked back once, saw Evelyn climbing toward the Overwatch position that Marcus Sullivan had marked 3 years ago, saw her moving with purpose that transcended mere survival. She was not running toward death. She was running toward purpose, toward meaning, toward the fulfillment of promises made to the dead. Brooks whispered a prayer for her soul, then followed his team into darkness, trusting that Divine Ghost would do what she always did, make the impossible happen one more time. Evelyn reached the Overwatch position in 4 minutes, her body screaming protest that she ignored through sheer force of will. The position was exactly as Marcus had described it in his tactical notes. Elevated rock outcrop with clear sight lines to checkpoint Delta. Natural cover that concealed her from enemy observation. Perfect angles for engaging multiple targets in rapid succession. She settled behind her rifle, controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate drop to combat rhythm. Through her scope, she could see Khalid al-Rahman standing beside his command vehicle, directing forces with the confidence of a man who believed he had won. He did not know that Divine Ghost had just positioned herself to end his command, did not know that the woman he had been hunting for 3 years was about to become his executioner, did not know that Marcus Sullivan's ghost walked beside her, guiding her hand, steadying her aim. Evelyn thought about Emma watching from 3 kilometers away, thought about Jackson Hayes and SEAL Team 9 running toward safety, thought about Ryan Carter clinging to life by threads so thin they could barely be seen, thought about all the warriors she had saved over 8 years and all the ones she had failed to save, thought about Marcus Sullivan dying in this valley so she could live. Her finger rested on the trigger. Her enhanced senses processed wind and distance and probability. Her failing nervous system gave her enough clarity for one more mission, one more impossible shot, one more promise kept to the dead. She whispered 3 words into the darkness. "This is for you, Marcus." Then she squeezed the trigger, and checkpoint Delta exploded into chaos as Divine Ghost declared war on an enemy who had thought themselves safe. The math still did not work. 43 enemies, limited ammunition, failing body, impossible odds. But Evelyn Blackwood had built a career on making impossible into inevitable, and she was not done yet. The first shot from Evelyn's Overwatch position arrived without warning, without preamble, without the courtesy of fear that sometimes preceded death on the battlefield. A 190-grain boat-tail hollow point traveling at 2,650 feet per second across 847 meters of Afghan night air, cutting through atmosphere with the ballistic efficiency that modern ammunition engineering had perfected over decades of research and development. The bullet struck the heavy machine gunner on checkpoint Delta's western flank directly through the temple. the point of impact chosen with anatomical precision to guarantee instant death, his skull offering no more resistance than an eggshell before the superior kinetic energy that physics demanded from mass and velocity combined. He collapsed across his weapon without sound or ceremony, dead before his nervous system could process the catastrophic damage, dead before his brain could send the final signals that would have made his finger tighten on the trigger one last time in involuntary muscle spasm. The 50 caliber machine gun fell silent, its potential for destruction neutralized by a single precisely placed round delivered from a distance that most riflemen would have considered beyond the reliable engagement envelope. The sound of the shot reached a checkpoint delta a full 2.5 seconds after the bullet's impact, the supersonic crack echoing off rock walls and canyon surfaces in patterns that created acoustic confusion about the shooter's actual location. Enemy combatants froze for a heartbeat that stretched into 2 and then 3, uncertain whether the sound had come from the west or the east, from above or below, from one shooter or many positioned in coordinated ambush. Khalid al-Rahman's head snapped toward the fallen machine gunner, with the speed of a man whose survival had depended on reading battlefields faster than his enemies for 3 decades. His tactical mind processed information with computational efficiency developed through endless combat, through mistakes that had killed friends and lessons that had been purchased with blood. Single shot, precision placement, range over 800 meters based on the delay between impact and sound signature. Professional sniper employing match-grade ammunition and optics that exceeded anything his forces possessed. American capabilities. Special operations methodology. But that was impossible. His intelligence network had confirmed that SEAL Team 9 was pinned in the valley to the west, surrounded by his forces on 3 sides, ammunition critical and casualties mounting with each passing minute. They had no sniper support, no overwatch element, no backup within 20 kilometers of their position. They were alone and dying exactly as he had planned during weeks of preparation, exactly as the tactical situation dictated they should be. Unless the intelligence was wrong, unless someone else had entered the battlefield undetected, unless the ghost that had haunted his dreams for 3 years had returned to Ka-7 Valley the same way she had come 3 years ago to kill his brother, Rashid, and escape into darkness while he listened helplessly to radio traffic describing the impossible. The second shot arrived 38 seconds after the first, and this time Khalid saw the muzzle flash despite the distance and darkness. A brief spark of light from an elevated position 500 meters east, exactly where local fighters had always claimed the terrain was too difficult to access, where his own scouts had reported sheer rock faces and unstable ground that made the approach suicidal for anyone except mountain goats and madmen. The RPG team leader died with Khalid's name half-formed on his lips, his last words lost in the wet gurgle of a throat shot that destroyed his larynx and severed his carotid artery with surgical precision. Blood fountained in the darkness, arterial spray that looked black under starlight, life pumping out through a wound that no field medicine could address. He fell backward, clutching at the ruin of his throat, his launcher clattering against stone with the distinctive metallic ring of Russian-manufactured weapons, the unfired rocket rolling free and coming to rest against a boulder. "She's here," Khalid whispered, his voice carrying equal parts rage and something that might have been professional respect, the acknowledgement that one warrior gives to another when facing an opponent worthy of the battlefield. Divine ghost. After 3 years of searching, after 3 years of preparing defenses and training fighters and planning for this exact contingency, after 3 years of dreaming about revenge and justice and settling accounts written in blood and betrayal, she's finally here. He grabbed his radio, keyed the emergency frequency that connected him to every fighter under his command. All units, single sniper Eastern Ridge, suppress and eliminate, priority target, maximum effort. 41 fighters who had been oriented toward the western approach pivoted to face east, their weapons seeking targets in darkness, punctuated only by occasional muzzle flashes that revealed positions for heartbeats before fading back into night. Heavy machine guns opened up, tracers painting red streaks across the valley as gunners walked fire toward the elevated position where Evelyn had revealed herself. But she was already moving, had fired her second shot, knowing it would draw exactly this response, had planned for the volume of return fire that would have shredded anyone foolish enough to remain in place. She flowed across terrain like water finding the path of least resistance, using every depression and boulder for cover, moving between positions faster than enemy gunners could adjust their aim. 300 meters west of the erupting battlefield, moving through darkness toward an objective none of them could see clearly because their night vision equipment had been damaged or lost during the initial ambush. Hours ago, SEAL Team 9 heard the battle erupt behind them with the distinctive acoustic signatures of precision rifle fire punctuated by the heavier thunder of machine guns and the crump of RPG rounds detonating against stone with enough force to send shockwaves through the ground beneath their feet. Jackson Hayes stopped his team with the raised fist, the hand signal invisible in darkness, but communicated through touch as Tyler Brooks felt Hayes' movement and relayed it down the line through physical contact, each warrior passing the message to the next in the human chain that connected them all. Hayes stood listening to the distinctive crack of Evelyn's rifle fire that he recognized from 30 minutes of observation, listening to the heavier automatic weapons fire that represented enemy response, listening to the changing rhythm of combat that told stories to ears trained to read battlefields through sound alone. She engaged, Hayes said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the moment of relative silence between volleys. Ghost is in contact. Heavy contact. Multiple weapon systems responding to her position. She's drawing every enemy in that checkpoint toward her like moths to flame. Now we move fast before Khalid realizes he's been flanked, before he understands that his perfect defensive position has been compromised by an operator he didn't know was on the battlefield. "Sir," Tyler Brooks said, his voice tight with concern that bordered on insubordination, tight with the emotional conflict between following orders and abandoning someone who had saved his life not once but twice in 5 years. "We can't just leave her. She's one operator against 40-plus fighters in fortified positions with interlocking fields of fire. She'll be killed. She'll be torn apart by that much firepower concentrated on a single position. We have to help her." Hayes turned to face his team, and in the faint starlight that filtered through thin clouds, they could see the anguish in his expression, could read in the lines of his face and the set of his shoulders the weight of command decisions that never got easier. No matter how many times you made them, no matter how much experience you accumulated in leading men into combat, she's buying us time with her life. She's making a conscious choice to sacrifice herself so that 9 Americans can escape this valley and go home to their families. The worst thing we can do, the most disrespectful thing we can possibly do, is waste that sacrifice by getting caught because we tried to help someone who told us explicitly and with absolute clarity to keep moving and complete the extraction. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over them like snow falling on graves. She gave us orders, direct orders from an operator whose rank and capabilities exceed anything we can offer in support. We follow those orders because that's what professionals do. We honor her choice by completing the mission she's dying to accomplish. Now move. That's not a suggestion. That's an order from your commanding officer who will write the after-action report and live with this decision for whatever years remain to him. They moved because orders were orders, and Hayes was right, even though being right felt like betrayal, felt like abandoning family, felt like the kind of choice that would haunt quiet moments and sleepless nights for decades to come. They moved carrying Ryan Carter on his stretcher, the young sailor clinging to life with the same stubborn determination that had kept SEAL Team 9 fighting when logic suggested surrender. They moved bearing their dead wrapped in ponchos because warriors did not leave fallen comrades on foreign battlefields if any possibility existed of bringing them home. They moved limping on wounds that had not yet been properly treated, running on reserves that should have been exhausted hours ago, sustained by training and discipline and the knowledge that Divine Ghost was dying so they could live. Sarah Mitchell ran beside Carter's stretcher, one hand on his neck checking for a pulse that remained steady but weak, her medic's mind cataloging all the things that could still go wrong before they reached medical evacuation. Heart arrhythmia from blood loss, delayed cardiac arrest, pneumothorax recurring despite the decompression, sepsis from wounds contaminated by Afghan dirt that carried bacteria Western immune systems had never encountered, brain damage from hypoxia during the minutes when his heart had stopped beating in the knife-edge ravine. He was alive because Evelyn Blackwood had performed CPR in absolute darkness while navigating backward through terrain that should have been impossible, while guiding 8 other warriors through hell with nothing but her voice and enhanced capabilities that bordered on supernatural. Alive because someone had cared enough to do the impossible rather than accept the inevitable, had refused to let death claim him, because refusing was what Guardians did even when accepting would have been easier and more logical. She's going to die back there, Mitchell said quietly to Hayes, her voice carrying the flat affect of someone stating obvious facts that hurt too much to acknowledge with emotion. You know that. We all know that. She's going to die alone, fighting enemies who want her dead for killing their people 3 years ago. She's going to die so we can live, and we're going to have to carry that knowledge for the rest of our lives. Hayes said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make it better. Nothing that would change the mathematics of sacrifice or alter the brutal equation that sometimes required one life to purchase 9, that demanded payment in blood for debts incurred through survival. He had seen it before in Fallujah and Ramadi and a dozen other places where good people died for reasons that seemed compelling in the moment but felt hollow in the aftermath. He would probably see it again if he survived long enough, if he continued leading men into harm's way and making decisions that killed some to save others, if he kept serving in a profession that demanded impossible choices as the price of continued service. At the Overwatch position Marcus Sullivan had scouted 3 years ago, Evelyn fired her third shot and watched the enemy mortar spotter collapse with his binoculars still pressed against his face. The optics shattered from the bullet's passage through his skull, fragments of glass and bone and brain matter spraying across the fighter who had been standing beside him. That fighter froze in shock, staring at what remained of his comrade, unable to process the sudden transformation from living human to shredded meat. Evelyn's fourth shot took him in the chest before he could recover, the hollow point expanding on impact and creating a wound channel that destroyed both lungs and the heart between them. She was changing position even as he fell, moving to her secondary firing point 40 meters north, knowing that enemy forces would be ranging in on her last muzzle flash, that staying in one place for more than 2 shots meant death. The training that Omega Ghost Division had burned into her nervous system over 18 months of hell had created reflexes that operated below conscious thought, muscle memory that saved her life through actions she barely registered making. Heavy machine gun fire tore through the position she had just vacated, 50 caliber rounds pulverizing stone and sending rock fragments spinning through the air with enough energy to kill. If she had remained in place for even 5 seconds longer, those rounds would have found her, would have torn through body armor and flesh and bone with the casual indifference of superior firepower. She settled behind a boulder, controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate drop back to combat rhythm. Her hands trembled slightly, nerve damage announcing itself through symptoms she could no longer ignore. The tremor was worse than it had been an hour ago, worse than it had been that morning, degradation accelerating under the stress of sustained combat and physical exertion that would have destroyed normal operators. How much time did she have before her hands refused to obey her commands? Before the enhanced capabilities that made her divine ghost degraded into normal human limitations that would get her killed? Hours? Minutes? She did not know, could only push forward and hope her body held together long enough to finish what she had started. Through her scope, she acquired her next target, the enemy communications specialist, identified by the radio handset pressed against his ear and the antenna array visible above his position. He was coordinating the response to her attack, directing fire and repositioning forces with the efficiency that came from training and experience. Kill him, and Khalid's forces would lose coordination, would devolve from organized defense into individual fighters making independent decisions. She fired. The bullet struck the radio itself, passed through the housing and antenna mount, and continued into the specialist's jaw. Not a kill shot, but devastating nonetheless, the kind of wound that would take him out of the fight and spread panic among anyone who witnessed it. 5 shots, 5 enemies eliminated or disabled, 36 remaining. The mathematics still did not favor her, but they were improving. Khalid al-Rahman watched his carefully prepared defense dissolving into chaos, watched positions he had spent weeks fortifying become death traps as a single shooter systematically dismantled his command structure. He had seen this before, 3 years ago, when 2 American operators had walked through his defenses like they were made of paper instead of steel and blood. Divine Ghost fought the same way now that she had fought then. Not through overwhelming firepower, but through precision application of violence to critical nodes. Kill the heavy weapons operators. Destroy the communications. Eliminate the leadership. create chaos where there had been coordination. But this time would be different. This time he had prepared for her. This time he had assets in place specifically designed to counter operators like Divine Ghost. He keyed his radio, speaking quickly in Pashto. Yusuf, take your team and flank her position from the north. She's moving after every shot, staying mobile, but she has to be operating from that ridgeline. Pin her down, force her to engage close quarters, make her fight our fight instead of hers. His son's voice came back immediately, steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Father, she killed 9 ghost hunters in 11 minutes during the first engagement. My team is good, but we're not that good. If we go after her in close quarters, we die. Khalid's voice hardened with command and something else, something that might have been desperation. Then you die serving God and avenging your uncle, but you will go because I order it, because this is what we train for, because letting her escape again is not acceptable. She killed Rashid. She destroyed our operation 3 years ago. She cannot be allowed to do it again. There was a pause, heavy with implications that both men understood. Then Yusuf said quietly, "As you command, Father, we are moving now." 12 fighters detached from the main defensive positions and began working their way north through the darkness, moving with the tactical discipline that came from months of training under Yusuf's leadership. They were the best that Black Serpent could field. Veterans who had survived multiple engagements with American forces, men who understood that Divine Ghost was not supernatural but simply human, enhanced to the edge of what biology and training could accomplish. Human meant killable. Enhanced meant difficult but not impossible. They moved with confidence born from experience and faith that Allah would guide their bullets to the target that had eluded them for 3 years. Evelyn saw them coming through her scope, counted 12 fighters moving with tactical proficiency that exceeded normal insurgent capabilities. They were spreading out to cover multiple approach vectors, using terrain intelligently, advancing with the kind of discipline that suggested professional military training. She had 7 rounds remaining in her current magazine. 12 targets. The math did not work unless she made every shot count, unless she transitioned to her sidearm for close engagement, unless she was willing to let them close to distances where enhanced capabilities mattered less than numbers and firepower. She made her decision in the space between heartbeats. Let them come. Let them think they had trapped her. Let them close to knife fighting range where Omega Ghost Division training gave her advantages that would surprise men who thought numbers guaranteed victory. She fired 3 more shots in rapid succession, each one dropping an enemy fighter from the main defensive positions below. Not the flanking team, but their support, the heavy weapons that would have provided covering fire during their assault. Without that support, Yusuf's team would be advancing into a kill zone where Evelyn held every advantage. 4 rounds left, 12 enemies closing fast, time measured in seconds before contact. Evelyn slung her rifle, drew her sidearm, and prepared for the kind of close-quarters violence that most snipers avoided because it meant abandoning their primary advantage. But she was not most snipers. She had been a SEAL before she had been a sniper, had learned to fight at any range before Omega Ghost Division had enhanced those capabilities into something that defied normal combat parameters. The first 2 fighters from Yusuf's team died before they realized they had found their target. Evelyn came at them from an angle they had not anticipated, moving through darkness with absolute silence. Her enhanced senses tracking their positions through sound and smell and the subtle displacement of air that came from human movement. 2 shots, 2 headshots, executed with the same precision she showed at 800 meters, but delivered from 3 meters away. The suppressed pistol made sounds like hands clapping, sharp cracks that could have been anything in the acoustic chaos of the firefight below. She was moving before their bodies hit the ground, flowing toward her next targets, with the fluid grace that came from thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training. The next 3 died in a span of 8 seconds, killed by an operator who moved faster than their training had prepared them for, who struck from angles they had not considered, who fought with a ruthlessness that made their own violence seem hesitant by comparison. Yusuf heard his men dying through their radio links, heard the brief exclamations of surprise and pain and terror that marked the moment when they understood they were facing something beyond their capabilities. He had 5 fighters left from the 12 he had started with. 5 men against 1 woman who was systematically destroying his team. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Regroup at the rally point. We need to rethink this approach. But falling back meant admitting defeat, meant acknowledging that Divine Ghost had beaten them again, meant accepting that the woman who had killed his uncle 3 years ago was about to escape unpunished for the second time. Yusuf felt rage and shame warring in his chest, felt the weight of his father's expectations and his own pride demanding that he press the attack. A bullet struck the rock beside his head, fragments of stone cutting his cheek deep enough to draw blood. He spun toward the source, saw muzzle flash from a position that should have been impossible to reach, fired a burst from his AK-47 that accomplished nothing except wasting ammunition on empty air. Evelyn had already moved, was already positioning for her next shot, was already 3 steps ahead of enemies who were reacting to threats instead of anticipating them. This was the advantage that 8 years of impossible missions had created. The ability to think faster and move faster and shoot faster than opponents who were merely excellent instead of enhanced. Her pistol was empty, the slide locked back on the last round she had fired. She dropped the magazine, inserted a fresh one from her vest, released the slide, and chambered a round. The entire reload took 1.8 seconds, smooth and automatic, muscle memory that required no conscious thought. Yusuf and his remaining 4 fighters were retreating now, abandoning the assault that had cost them 7 dead in less than 3 minutes. They ran through darkness toward the relative safety of Checkpoint Delta's main positions, leaving behind bodies and blood and the knowledge that they had engaged Divine Ghost in close quarters and survived only because she had let them go. Evelyn did not pursue. 5 enemies fleeing were 5 enemies not shooting at SEAL Team 9, 5 threats removed from the tactical equation without expenditure of ammunition she could not afford to waste. She let them run, watched them disappear into the maze of fortifications below, and felt something close to pity. They were good, well-trained, disciplined, brave, everything that soldiers should be. But they were fighting for a cause that required them to die while she was fighting to let others live. And that difference made all the difference in the world. She checked her remaining ammunition, 4 rifle rounds, 23 pistol rounds, 3 fragmentation grenades, her combat knife, and a failing nervous system that was degrading faster than she had anticipated, that might give her minutes or hours before total collapse, but certainly not days. Below her, Khalid al-Rahman was reorganizing his remaining forces, pulling them back from exposed positions, consolidating around his command post. He had started with 43 fighters. Now he had perhaps 28 still combat effective. Divine Ghost had killed or wounded 15 in less than 20 minutes of engagement. But 28 was still enough to overwhelm one operator if they worked together, if they abandoned the defensive positions that had made them vulnerable, and instead came at her with coordinated assault that prioritized overwhelming force over tactical finesse. Khalid understood this, was already issuing orders that would transform his remaining fighters from defenders into attackers. Evelyn saw the shift happening through her scope, saw enemy forces massing for assault, and knew that her time in the overwatch position had just ended. She could kill a few more from range, but eventually they would swarm her position through sheer numbers, would overrun her defenses and end Divine Ghost's career with bullets and grenades in the brutal mathematics of many against one. Time to move again. Time to bring the fight to them instead of letting them bring it to her. Time to do what Marcus Sullivan had done 3 years ago, to make the choice that good warriors made when there were no good choices left. She descended from the overwatch position with controlled speed, moving toward Checkpoint Delta instead of away from it, advancing toward enemies who thought she would retreat. The tactical surprise would buy her seconds of confusion, seconds she would use to create maximum disruption before they recovered and brought their superior numbers to bear. Her radio crackled with Emma Sullivan's voice, young and urgent and afraid in ways that 16-year-olds should not have to experience, afraid with the specific terror that came from watching people you cared about walk toward death with calm acceptance. Evelyn, SEAL Team 9 just reported they're clear of enemy contact and moving to Extraction Point Delta. They made it. Uncle Victor confirmed safe passage through the Eastern Corridor. You can disengage now. You can fall back. You accomplished the mission. You saved them all. Please come back. Evelyn kept moving through the darkness that surrounded Checkpoint Delta like physical presence, kept descending toward the valley floor where Khalid's forces were regrouping and preparing for assault that would commit their remaining numbers to overwhelming her position through sheer weight of fire. Negative, Emma. I still have work to finish here. Work that can't wait. Work that needs doing now while they're confused and disorganized. You're one person against 28 fighters in fortified positions with heavy weapons and prepared defenses, Emma protested, her voice rising despite attempts to maintain tactical discipline on what should have been a secure channel. The mission is accomplished. 9 Americans are going home to their families because of you. Dad would want you to survive. He would want you to extract. He would want you to train me like you promised. You don't have to die today. Evelyn paused in her descent, finding cover behind a boulder that provided concealment from enemy positions below, taking a moment to check her remaining ammunition and assess her physical condition with the clinical detachment that combat required. Her left calf bled from shrapnel wounds, the blood warm and sticky inside her boot. Her ribs ached where she had slammed into rock during one of her rapid position changes. Her hands trembled with nerve damage that was accelerating faster than any medical projection had suggested, her enhanced capabilities degrading in real time as her nervous system failed under sustained stress. Your father would want me to do what's right, Evelyn replied, her voice carrying certainty that came from 3 years of thinking about Marcus Sullivan's sacrifice and understanding what he had been trying to teach her through that final choice. And leaving Khalid alive to plan more ambushes, to kill more Americans, to continue the cycle of violence that's consumed this valley for 30 years and will consume it for 30 more if someone doesn't end it? That's not right. That's not acceptable. That's not what Guardians do. She paused, her voice softening despite the tactical situation developing around her, despite the enemy forces that were even now maneuvering to encircle her position and end Divine Ghost's career with overwhelming firepower. Emma, if I don't make it out of this valley, if the mathematics finally catch up with me and I can't do the impossible one more time, I need you to know something. I need you to understand what your father meant to me and what you mean to me. Don't, Emma's voice broke, the teenager underneath the tactical observer finally surfacing through cracks in discipline that years of military upbringing had created. Don't talk like you're going to die. Please, I just found you. I just started learning what my father wanted me to learn. I just started understanding what it means to be a warrior and a guardian and someone who stands between darkness and light. I can't lose you too. Not after losing Dad. Not after spending 3 years not knowing the truth about how he died or why he died or what he died for. You're not losing me, Evelyn said, her voice gentle in ways that Divine Ghost rarely allowed herself to be. Gentle with the tenderness that came from caring about people instead of missions, and understanding that sometimes emotional truth mattered more than tactical efficiency. You're watching me finish what your father started. You're learning the final lesson he wanted you to learn. The lesson that can't be taught in classrooms or training facilities or simulator exercises that sanitize death and make sacrifice seem noble instead of terrible. She took a breath, feeling pain in her ribs that suggested cracked bones, or worse. That being a guardian means standing between the darkness and the light even when it costs everything. Even when it means dying alone in a foreign valley so that people you've never met can go home to families who will never know your name. Even when it means choosing the hard right over the easy wrong, because that's what separates warriors from killers and guardians from soldiers who just follow orders. Remember this, Emma. Remember what you're seeing tonight. Remember that I chose this, that I walked toward this knowing how it would probably end, that I considered the alternatives and rejected them because some things matter more than survival, and some promises have to be kept even when keeping them means dying, because someday you'll be in my position, making the same choice, standing at the same crossroads where duty and survival diverge, and you have to pick one path knowing you can't walk both. And you'll need to know, Evelyn continued, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years spent honoring Marcus Sullivan's memory and understanding what he had tried to teach through his sacrifice, that it's worth it, that choosing to be a guardian instead of just a warrior, that choosing to protect instead of just destroy, that choosing to end cycles of violence instead of perpetuating them, that all of it is worth whatever price we pay. Your father knew that. He lived it every day. He died proving it. And I really hope, that when my time comes, I prove it too. The radio was silent except for the sound of Emma Sullivan crying for a father she had lost and a mentor she was losing. Crying with the grief that came from understanding sacrifice before most people her age understood consequence. crying because she was 16 years old and watching her entire world being redefined through violence and death and choices that good people made in impossible situations. Evelyn felt the weight of that grief, carried it with her as she resumed moving through darkness toward enemies who wanted her dead, added it to all the other burdens she had been carrying for 8 years of impossible missions. The weight of Marcus Sullivan's death, the weight of every warrior she had saved through choices that required her to risk everything. The weight of promises made to the dead that bound her more tightly than any oath administered by living commanders. "You'll be better than both of us," Evelyn whispered into the radio, speaking to Emma, but also to Marcus's ghost that walked beside her in the darkness, to the memory of a partner who had shown her what it meant to be more than just effective, to be good in ways that transcended tactical proficiency. "You'll take what your father taught me and what I'm teaching you, and you'll create something better than either of us could imagine. You'll be the guardian that ends cycles instead of perpetuating them. You'll be the warrior who knows when to fight and when to choose mercy. You'll be everything we hoped we could be, but never quite achieved." "Now watch," Evelyn said, her voice hardening back into tactical mode as she prepared for the final assault. "Watch and learn, because this is what it looks like when guardians keep promises." She reached the perimeter of Checkpoint Delta and began her final assault, moving through fortifications with the speed and precision that came from 8 years of impossible missions that had taught her to read battlefields like other people read books, to understand the geometry of violence and the psychology of men under fire. Her pistol spoke in controlled bursts, 2 rounds here and 3 rounds there, each engagement lasting seconds before she moved to the next position, with fluid transitions that made her seem to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Enemy fighters fell in confusion and chaos that came from facing a threat their training had not prepared them for. Unable to coordinate a response against someone who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, that struck from unexpected angles and faded before they could return effective fire, who violated every tactical principle they had been taught about how operators engaged in fortified positions. Evelyn was not fighting to win through superior force because she did not have superior force. She was not fighting to hold ground because ground meant nothing when you were 1 against 28. She was fighting to create terror, to make them afraid, to destroy their will to continue before her body destroyed her ability to fight. A grenade detonated behind her, close enough that the overpressure wave slammed into her like a physical wall and sent her stumbling forward 3 steps before she caught her balance. Shrapnel tore through her left calf and sent pain signals that she cataloged and ignored with the discipline that 8 years had created. Pain that would matter later if there was a later, but right now was just information about damage that had already occurred. Keep moving, keep fighting, keep breathing. An RPG streaked past her head, missing by inches measured rather than feet. The rocket motor so close, she felt the heat wash across her face and smelled the chemical propellant that drove the warhead toward whatever target the shooter had acquired in darkness and panic. The warhead detonated against a rock face 50 meters beyond, the explosion lighting the valley like artificial daylight for a heartbeat that revealed Evelyn's position to everyone who had eyes to see before darkness returned and concealment wrapped around her again like protective cloak. She killed the RPG gunner with 2 rounds to the chest, center mass shots that struck with devastating effect, the hollow points expanding on impact and creating wound channels that destroyed both lungs and the heart between them, killing him in seconds as his cardiovascular system failed and his brain ran out of oxygenated blood. She killed his loader with 1 round to the head because the loader was turning toward her with an AK-47 raised, and headshots were the only guarantee of instant incapacitation when facing threats that close. And she was moving again before their bodies completed their falls to the earth, before gravity finished pulling dead weight down to ground that would claim them as it claimed all warriors eventually. Somewhere in the chaos, Khalid al-Rahman screamed orders into his radio that his fighters could not follow because following required coordination and clarity and the absence of terror, tried to organize a defense that had devolved into individual survival instincts instead of collective tactical action. He had planned for every contingency except this one, except a single operator who fought with absolute disregard for personal survival, who cared only about mission accomplishment and keeping promises to the dead, who moved through his fortifications like she owned them because she understood something fundamental that he had forgotten in 30 years of warfare. That fear was a weapon sharper than any blade, more devastating than any explosive, more effective than any amount of firepower if you knew how to wield it with precision and purpose. Divine Ghost wielded fear like a master craftsman worked precious metal, shaping enemy psychology with the same care she applied to bullet placement, creating panic that accomplished what bullets alone never could. Evelyn could see Khalid now through gaps in the fortifications, could acquire him as a target if she chose, could end this with one shot that would kill the man who had murdered Marcus Sullivan 3 years ago in this same valley. Her pistol was up, her sight picture was perfect, her trigger finger was applying pressure that would send a round through his center mass in the next half second. But something stopped her. Some instinct that whispered this was not the ending that mattered, that killing Khalid accomplished nothing except temporary revenge that would feel good for a moment and hollow forever after. That the cycle of violence had to end some other way, had to be broken instead of perpetuated, had to stop with someone choosing mercy when vengeance would have been easier and more satisfying. Marcus would not have killed him, she thought. Marcus would have found another way. Marcus always found another way because he understood that being a guardian meant creating futures instead of destroying them, meant choosing the hard path that led toward peace instead of the easy path that led toward more war. She lowered her pistol and withdrew into darkness, leaving Checkpoint Delta in chaos behind her, leaving Khalid alive to understand that Divine Ghost had chosen mercy over vengeance, that some warriors fought for purposes larger than personal satisfaction, that the woman who had killed his brother 3 years ago had decided not to kill him today because killing him would have meant becoming what he represented, and she refused to let this war transform her into another killer who perpetuated cycles instead of ending them. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Silence fell across the valley like snow covering battlefields after armies had passed, sudden and complete, and somehow more terrifying than the violence that had preceded it, because silence meant unknown outcomes and uncertain conclusions, and the possibility that what came next would be worse than what had just finished. Khalid stood among his dead and wounded, 21 casualties from what had started as 43 fighters 4 hours ago, and felt defeat like a physical weight on his shoulders and that made standing upright require conscious effort. Divine Ghost had beaten him again, had walked through his defenses that should have stopped any assault, had destroyed his forces that should have overwhelmed any single operator, had accomplished mission objectives that should have been impossible based on every tactical calculation he could make. And worst of all, she had chosen to let him live in a demonstration of superiority that stung worse than any bullet, hurt worse than any physical wound, shamed him in ways that death in combat never could. She could have killed me, Khalid said to his son Yusuf, who had survived the close quarters engagement and returned to his father's side. She had me in her sights. I saw her weapon rise. I saw death coming, and she chose not to pull the trigger. She chose to let me live with this defeat. Yusuf said nothing because there was nothing to say that would ease the shame of being shown mercy by an enemy who should have shown none, who should have taken revenge for her fallen partner instead of choosing the path that led away from continued violence. They stood together in the ruins of Checkpoint Delta and understood that they had been defeated not by superior force but by superior purpose, not by better weapons but by better understanding of what warfare should accomplish. Emma Sullivan watched through binoculars from 3 kilometers away as Evelyn emerged from Checkpoint Delta and began the long walk east toward Extraction Point Delta, where Victor Kane waited with medical personnel and transport that would carry SEAL Team 9 back to safety. The woman moved with a limp now, favored her left leg where shrapnel had torn through muscle and possibly bone, held her left arm pressed against her ribs in a way that suggested broken bones or internal injury that would require surgery and months of recovery if she survived long enough to receive treatment. But she was alive. Against all odds and mathematical probability and tactical logic that said 1 against 43 was suicide disguised as mission planning, Divine Ghost had survived. She had kept her promise to Marcus Sullivan. She had saved SEAL Team 9. She had cleared Checkpoint Delta. She had accomplished mission objectives that should have required a platoon and done it alone with nothing but enhanced training and absolute refusal to accept defeat. And she had shown Marcus Sullivan's daughter what it meant to be a guardian, had taught the lesson that classrooms could never convey, in training facilities could never replicate, had demonstrated through action instead of words that being a warrior meant more than killing enemies, and that being a guardian meant choosing when to stop killing, even when killing would have been justified and satisfying and easy. Emma lowered her binoculars and wiped tears from her eyes, understanding that she had just witnessed something that would define the rest of her life, that would shape every decision she made going forward, that would haunt and inspire her in equal measure for whatever years remained to her. She had watched divine ghosts keep promises to the dead, and someday Emma Sullivan would make those same promises and keep them the same way, with blood and sacrifice, and choices that broke her heart while saving her soul. Evelyn Blackwood collapsed 300 meters from the extraction point, her body finally giving out after hours of sustained combat that would have killed normal operators twice over, that had pushed her enhanced physiology past every limit that 8 years of Omega Ghost Division training had created. Her left leg refused to support weight anymore. Shrapnel wounds and muscle damage, combining with accelerating nerve deterioration to create catastrophic failure that no amount of willpower or tactical discipline could overcome. She went down hard, hitting rocky ground with impact that drove air from lungs already laboring from exhaustion and possible punctured pleura. Impact that sent fresh waves of pain through ribs she suspected were cracked or broken. Impact that finally forced her to acknowledge what she had been denying for the past 6 hours. She was done, finished, at the absolute end of what her body could endure. She lay there for a moment that stretched into minutes, staring up at stars that burned with cold light across the Afghan sky, the same stars that had watched Alexander the Great march through these valleys 2,000 years ago. The same stars that had witnessed the Soviet invasion and the American intervention and all the endless wars that had consumed this land for millennia. Stars that had watched over this valley for millions of years and would keep watching long after every human who fought here tonight had turned to dust in memory and forgotten names on memorial walls. Her breathing was ragged, each inhalation feeling like broken glass grinding in her chest, her vision swimming with exhaustion and blood loss in the strange dissociation that came from pushing human physiology past sustainable limits. Her hands trembled so badly she could not have fired her weapon accurately, even if enemies appeared, could not have performed even basic manual tasks that required fine motor control, could barely maintain grip on consciousness that wanted desperately to fade into darkness that promised relief from pain. This is how it ends, she thought with the clarity that sometimes came in moments of complete physical breakdown. Not in glorious combat against overwhelming odds with bullets flying and grenades detonating and the kind of heroic last stand that recruiting videos celebrated. Not with a final defiant act that would be remembered in unofficial stories told by operators in quiet bars late at night, but collapsed on cold stone 300 meters from safety because my body finally refused to continue, because enhanced capabilities have limits and I just exceeded mine, because being divine ghost meant sacrificing everything, including the ability to walk away when the mission was done. Not remembered as the operator who never failed a mission, but as the one whose nervous system gave out at the worst possible moment. The one who survived the impossible combat but could not survive the aftermath. The one who walked toward death and found it waiting not in enemy fire, but in simple physical collapse. Vehicle engines rumbled in the distance, growing louder as they approached from the east, where extraction teams had been waiting for SEAL Team 9's arrival. Evelyn tried to rise, managed to get one knee under her before her damaged leg gave out again, and deposited her back on the ground with jarring force that made her gasp involuntarily. She reached for her sidearm with hands that shook too badly to maintain a proper grip, prepared to sell her life as expensively as possible if those vehicles carried enemies instead of friendlies. If Black Serpent forces had somehow anticipated the extraction route and positioned themselves to capture or kill Divine Ghost. A figure appeared out of the darkness, moving with the assured stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going, who had walked through countless battlefields and developed the ability to navigate chaos with calm efficiency. Victor Kane, Master Chief Petty Officer, with 35 years of service etched into every line of his weathered face, into every scar that marked his hands and arm, into the way he moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had absorbed damage over decades and learned to compensate. He was 58 years old and had seen more combat than most warriors experienced in 3 lifetimes, had lost friends and teammates and pieces of himself in conflicts that stretched from Panama to Iraq to Afghanistan, and all the small wars in between that official records barely acknowledged. He knelt beside Evelyn, his experienced eyes assessing her condition with the clinical efficiency of someone who had performed battlefield triage more times than he could count, who had held dying friends and made the terrible calculations about who could be saved and who was beyond help. "You look like hell, Ghost," he said, his voice carrying the gruff affection that career warriors develop for each other after surviving enough combat together. "Feel worse," Evelyn managed, her voice barely above a whisper, each word costing effort that left her more exhausted. "Like I got hit by a truck. Then the truck backed up and hit me again. Then it exploded." Kane keyed his radio, his tone shifting to command urgency. "Medic to my position immediate. Combat casualty, multiple penetrating wounds, possible internal injuries, suspected broken ribs, shock setting in. Move fast, she's priority one." He turned back to Evelyn, his calloused hands gentle as he checked her wounds with practiced efficiency. "SEAL Team 9 made it out. All 9. Ryan Carter is critical but alive. The rest are walking wounded. You saved them all." "Good," Evelyn said. "That's good." "Emma's here," King continued quietly. "She watched the whole thing through binoculars. Watched you spare Khalid when you could have killed him. She's got questions." "I'm sure she does," Evelyn said. "Is she safe?" "Safe as houses. Got her tucked in with my Delta team. She wanted to come with me to get you, but I told her no. Some things 16-year-olds don't need to see." A medic arrived. Adbani's hired arrived. A young Navy corpsman whose hands moved with the same efficiency Kane had shown. He cut away Evelyn's pant leg, exposing shrapnel wounds that had turned her calf into shredded meat, held together by force of will and tactical tape. He started an IV, began packing wounds with combat gauze, worked with the focused intensity that came from training that prepared medics to save lives under fire. "How bad?" Kane asked. "Bad enough," the corpsman replied. "She needs a hospital, real surgeons, blood transfusions, but she'll live if we move fast." They loaded Evelyn onto a stretcher, carried her to an armored MRAP that provided protection against the kind of ambushes that had nearly destroyed SEAL Team 9 hours earlier. Inside the vehicle, lit by red combat lighting that preserved night vision, Jackson Hayes waited with the remains of his team. Hayes stood when they brought Evelyn in, his face showing the exhaustion and relief and guilt that came from surviving when someone else had paid the price for that survival. "Ghost," he said simply. "Commander," Evelyn replied, managing a weak smile despite the pain. "Your people good. Thanks to you," Hayes paused, searching for words that could convey what he felt. "I've been a SEAL for 15 years, seen a lot of operators do a lot of impossible things, but I've never seen anything like what you did tonight. You saved my entire team, gave us all a chance to go home to our families. There aren't words for that kind of debt." "Don't need words," Evelyn said. "Just need you to remember. Remember that sometimes one person can make a difference. Remember that impossible is just another mission parameter. Remember that being a guardian means standing between darkness and light, even when the cost is everything." The vehicle rumbled east through darkness, carrying warriors who had survived hell through the intervention of someone who specialized in doing the impossible. They rode in silence, each warrior processing what they had witnessed, what they had survived, what they owed to a woman who had walked toward death so they could walk toward life. Sarah Mitchell sat beside Ryan Carter's stretcher, monitoring his vital signs with the obsessive attention that good medics brought to critical patients. His pulse was stronger now, his breathing more regular, his color improving from the deathly pallor that had marked him hours earlier. He would live. He would see his wife again. He would watch his twin daughters grow up. He would have a future because Evelyn Blackwood had refused to let him die. Tyler Brooks stared out the armored window at darkness rolling past, thinking about Fallujah 5 years ago, when a cold voice on the radio had guided his Marine platoon through an ambush that should have killed them all. Thinking about tonight when that same voice had done it again, had saved him for the second time in 5 years, had proven that divine ghost was real and watching over warriors who needed guardians. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small object he had been carrying since Fallujah. 3 rifle rounds arranged in a triangle, the signature that Divine Ghost left when departing a battlefield. He had found them 5 years ago after his platoon's miraculous survival, had carried them as a reminder that someone out there was protecting warriors like him. Now he understood who that someone was, understood what she sacrificed to do it, understood that the debt he owed could never be repaid, but had to be honored through service and remembrance, and becoming the kind of warrior who protected others the way she had protected him. The convoy reached Forward Operating Base Chapman 3 hours after departing the extraction point. Medical personnel swarmed the vehicles, triaging casualties with efficient urgency that came from months of experience treating combat wounded. They rushed Ryan Carter into surgery, his injuries critical enough to require immediate intervention. They treated the walking wounded with the kind of care that acknowledged pain while prioritizing function. And they took Evelyn Blackwood to a private medical facility reserved for operators whose identities were classified above the clearance level of normal military personnel. A surgical team was waiting, specialists flown in from Germany specifically to treat injuries sustained by someone whose capabilities and missions existed in the shadows between official records and operational necessity. Admiral Sarah Brennan, Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations Command, arrived at Forward Operating Base Chapman 6 hours after Evelyn's extraction, having diverted from another theater of operations the moment she received notification that Wrath-01 had been activated and subsequently extracted with critical injuries. She was 62 years old, had risen through Navy ranks at a time when women flag officers were rare enough to be remarkable, and successful enough to make admiral was nearly unprecedented, had overseen special operations that most Americans would never know existed and that official histories would never acknowledge. She had authorized Evelyn's recruitment into Omega Ghost Division 8 years ago, after reviewing her SEAL qualification scores and psychological evaluations and the kind of performance metrics that suggested exceptional potential. She had signed off on every Wrath protocol activation over those 8 years, had carried the weight of sending operators into impossible situations, knowing that some of them would not come back whole if they came back at all, had written classified after-action reports that documented capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what human beings should be able to accomplish. And she had lost operators before, good warriors who had been asked to do too much and paid the ultimate price. Each loss had carved another piece out of her soul, had added another weight to shoulders that already carried decades of command decisions and impossible choices. She entered the recovery room where Evelyn lay connected to monitors that beeped with reassuring rhythm and IV lines that delivered fluids and medications and the chemical support that kept damaged bodies functioning while they healed. Evelyn's body was wrapped in bandages that covered shrapnel wounds that had required surgical debridement and burns that had been treated with specialized dressings and the accumulated damage of a night spent fighting against impossible odds in a valley that had become legendary for consuming American warriors. Evelyn's eyes opened when Brennan approached, awareness cutting through the haze of pain medication and exhaustion with the discipline that even morphine could not completely suppress. "Admiral," she said, her voice rough from dehydration and trauma and hours of breathing smoke and dust. "Commander Blackwood," Brennan replied formally, maintaining the military protocols that governed their relationship even in moments of personal connection. Then her voice softened into something more human, more concerned. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got run over by a tank," Evelyn admitted with the kind of dark humor that warriors used to cope with physical damage that would traumatize civilians. "Multiple times, while the tank was on fire, and then the tank exploded." Brennan smiled despite the gravity of the situation, despite the reports she had read about injuries sustained and missions accomplished and choices made under fire. "The surgeons say you'll recover. 3 months of intensive physical therapy before you can walk without assistance. 6 months before you're cleared for light administrative duty. A year before you're back to full operational capability." She paused, and Evelyn understood what was coming before the Admiral spoke the words. Understood from the change in Brennan's tone and the way her eyes shifted slightly away from direct contact. "If you ever get back to full capability," Brennan continued, her voice carrying the weight of medical opinions and expert consultations and the kind of prognosis that ended careers. "The nerve damage is progressing faster than the medical projections suggested. The stress of tonight's operation, the sustained combat and physical exertion and repeated activation of enhanced capabilities under extreme conditions, all of it accelerated the degradation significantly beyond what anyone anticipated." The Admiral took a breath, delivering news that she had delivered too many times to too many operators who had given everything to missions that demanded everything. "You have maybe 6 months before your enhanced capabilities are completely gone, before the sensory processing and reflexes and spatial awareness that made you divine ghost degrade to normal human baselines. Maybe a year before fine motor control becomes problematic enough to affect daily activities. After that, Evelyn heard the weight in Brennan's voice. After that, you're looking at mandatory medical retirement with full disability benefits and the gratitude of a nation that will never know your name or understand what you sacrificed. I know, Evelyn said quietly, her voice carrying acceptance that came from 6 months of living with a diagnosis that had always pointed toward this moment. I've known since the diagnosis at Walter Reed. Since Dr. Kowalski showed me the MRI scans and explained that enhanced training comes with long-term costs that we're only beginning to understand. Since I realized that being Divine Ghost meant sacrificing not just missions but the rest of my life. Brennan's expression shifted to something between anger and sorrow and professional frustration. You knew. You knew you were dying by inches, and you requested activation for the CA-7 operation anyway. You walked into that valley knowing it would accelerate the nerve damage, knowing it might be your last mission at full capability, knowing that every shot you took and every position you held was purchased with pieces of your future health. She leaned forward, her flag officer bearing cracking enough to reveal genuine emotion underneath. Why, Evelyn? Why throw away whatever time you had left? Why not take the medical retirement and preserve what capabilities remained? Why sacrifice your future for one more mission? It needed to be my last mission, Evelyn replied. SEAL Team 9 needed someone who could do the impossible. Khalid needed to understand that cycles of violence can be broken. Emma needed to see what her father died teaching, and I needed to finish what Marcus started 3 years ago. Needed to prove that his sacrifice meant something. That training me meant something. That dying so I could live accomplished something beyond just keeping one operator breathing. Brennan sat in the chair beside the bed, her flag officer bearing, giving way to something more human, more personal. Marcus Sullivan was one of the best warriors I ever knew. When he died, when we lost him in the same valley trying to kill the same enemy you just spared, I thought we had lost something irreplaceable. But then I watched you tonight through the operational feed, watched you do things that shouldn't be possible, watched you save 9 Americans who would have died without intervention. Watched you choose mercy when vengeance would have been justified. She paused, meeting Evelyn's eyes with intensity that carried decades of command experience and hard-earned wisdom. Marcus didn't die for nothing. He died training you to be better than he was, and you just proved he succeeded. You're everything he hoped you would become, everything Omega Ghost Division was designed to create. The guardian who knows when to fight and when to show mercy. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Now you recover, Brennan said. You complete physical therapy. You train Emma Sullivan if that's what you both want. You teach the next generation what Marcus taught you. And when you're ready, we transition you from operator to instructor. Omega Ghost Division needs people who understand the cost of service, who can train warriors to be guardians instead of just killers. What about Wrath Protocol? Brennan's expression grew somber. Wrath Protocol is being retired, effective immediately. You were the last activation, the only activation who completed every mission successfully. 23 impossible operations over 8 years. 23 times you did what everyone else said couldn't be done. The protocol ends with you because nobody else can live up to that standard. Nobody else should have to try. Evelyn felt relief and loss warring in her chest, relief that no other operator would be asked to sacrifice themselves the way she had sacrificed. Loss that the identity she had built over 8 years was ending not with glory, but with medical retirement and the slow degradation of capabilities that had defined her. There's something else, Brennan continued. Emma Sullivan has requested to join the Naval Academy prep program with the intention of becoming a SEAL. She's citing you as her inspiration. Says she wants to be a guardian like her father was, like you are. She's 16, Evelyn protested. She's Marcus Sullivan's daughter, Brennan countered. She's been preparing for this her whole life, even if she didn't know it until tonight. The question is whether you're willing to mentor her, to teach her what her father wanted her to learn, to help us create the next generation of operators who understand that being a warrior is about more than just killing enemies. Evelyn thought about Emma watching through binoculars as Divine Ghost fought 43 enemies and chose to spare the one who mattered most. Thought about a 16-year-old girl learning lessons about sacrifice and mercy and the cost of service. Thought about Marcus Sullivan's ghost walking beside her through every mission, guiding her choices, reminding her what it meant to be more than just effective. Yes, Evelyn said. I'll train her. I'll teach her everything Marcus taught me and everything I learned from 8 years of impossible missions. I'll help her become the guardian who's better than both of us, the one who ends cycles instead of perpetuating them. Good, Brennan said, standing, because she's waiting outside right now. Has been for 3 hours. Refused to leave until she could talk to you. Send her in, Evelyn said. Emma Sullivan entered the recovery room with the uncertain steps of someone entering sacred space. Someone who understood they were about to have a conversation that would define the rest of their life. She was 16 years old, but looked younger in the harsh medical lighting, looked vulnerable in ways she had not looked while watching combat through binoculars. She stopped beside the bed, staring at the woman who had been her father's partner and was now her mentor. The woman who had shown her what it meant to be a guardian through actions instead of words. You spared him, Emma said quietly. You had Khalid al-Rahman in your sights, the man who killed my father. The man you've been hunting for 3 years, and you chose not to pull the trigger. Why? Evelyn took a breath, feeling broken ribs protest the expansion of her chest. Because killing him would have meant becoming what he represents. Because your father taught me that being a guardian means creating futures instead of destroying them. Because the cycle of violence has to end somewhere, and it might as well end with me choosing mercy when revenge would have been easier. She paused, searching for words that could convey what she had learned through 8 years of impossible missions and 3 years of carrying Marcus Sullivan's ghost. Your father died so I could escape with mission-critical intelligence. He chose to sacrifice himself because he understood that some things matter more than personal survival, that some missions are more important than any single warrior, that being a guardian means making hard choices that break your heart while saving your soul. I watched him die, Emma said, her voice breaking. Uncle Victor told me everything. Told me how Dad held off enemies so you could escape. How he used his last ammunition protecting your withdrawal. How he died alone in the darkness, doing what guardians do. And I watched you almost do the same thing tonight. Watched you walk toward death so SEAL Team 9 could walk toward life. Watched you become my father. No, Evelyn said firmly. I'm not your father. I'll never be your father. But I can teach you what he wanted you to learn. I can help you become the warrior he hoped you would be. The guardian who's better than either of us because she learned from our mistakes and built on our successes. Emma wiped tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. Will you train me? Will you teach me to be like you? I'll teach you to be better than me, Evelyn replied. I'll teach you everything your father taught me about being a guardian instead of just a warrior, about choosing when to fight and when to show mercy, about standing between darkness and light even when it costs everything, about keeping promises to the dead by creating futures for the living. She reached out with a hand that trembled from nerve damage and exhaustion, and Emma took it without hesitation. But you need to understand something first. This life takes everything. It took your father. It's taking my health and my capabilities and everything that made me divine ghost. It will take things from you that you can't imagine losing. It will ask you to make choices that will haunt you for decades. It will demand sacrifices that will break your heart over and over again. Emma met her eyes with determination that was pure Marcus Sullivan. I know. I watched you make those choices tonight. I saw what it cost you, and I'm willing to pay that price because some things matter more than personal comfort or safety or living a normal life. Because my father believed in this. Because you believe in this. Because if guardians don't stand between darkness and light, then who will? Evelyn felt something break open in her chest, some wall she had built to protect herself from caring too much about people she might lose. Your father would be proud of you. So proud. And so am I. They sat together in silence, mentor and student, the daughter of a fallen warrior, and the woman who had survived to teach her, connected by grief and purpose, and the understanding that some legacies were worth dying for, and some promises had to be kept no matter the cost. 2 weeks later, Evelyn was transferred to Walter Reed Medical Center for long-term recovery and physical therapy. The surgeons had done what they could, had repaired shrapnel damage, and treated burns and stabilized the nerve damage that was slowly destroying her enhanced capabilities. But they could not stop the progression, could not reverse the degradation, could not give her back what 8 years of Wrath Protocol missions had taken. She learned to walk again with a pronounced limp that physical therapy improved but could not eliminate. She learned to shoot again despite hands that trembled when she tried to maintain steady aim. She learned to accept limitations that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, learned to be human again after 8 years of being something more. And she began teaching Emma Sullivan everything Marcus had taught her, every lesson learned through blood and sacrifice and impossible missions. They met 3 times a week in secure training facilities where Evelyn passed on knowledge that officially did not exist. Tactical insights that came from operations that would remain classified for 50 years. Wisdom that could only be earned through experience that most humans would never survive. Emma absorbed it all with the focused intensity that had made her father such an exceptional operator. She learned to read battlefields and predict enemy movements and understand the geometry of violence. She learned to shoot and move and communicate with the efficiency that defined special operations. She learned the difference between warriors who killed and guardians who protected. But most importantly, she learned when not to pull the trigger, when to show mercy instead of delivering justice, when to end cycles instead of perpetuating them. 6 months after K7 Valley, Jackson Hayes visited Evelyn at Walter Reed with a request that came from SEAL Team 9. We want you to speak at Ryan Carter's medal ceremony. He's receiving the Navy Cross for actions during the ambush, for holding his position even while wounded, for refusing to quit even when quitting would have been understandable. Evelyn sat in her wheelchair, her legs still not strong enough for extended standing, and considered the request. I didn't do anything medal-worthy. I just did my job. You saved 9 Americans who would have died without intervention, Hayes replied. You completed a mission that should have required a platoon. You chose mercy when vengeance would have been justified. If that's not medal-worthy, then nothing is. The ceremony took place at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, home of SEAL training, and the place where warriors learn to become more than just soldiers. Ryan Carter stood at attention in his dress uniform, his wife and twin daughters beside him, his face showing the maturity that came from surviving combat that should have killed him. The citation was read aloud, describing his actions during the Ka-7 ambush with the kind of clinical language that military awards use to describe moments of absolute terror and desperate courage. It mentioned his wounds and his refusal to quit and his survival against odds that should have been impossible. But it did not mention Divine Ghost, did not mention the woman who had performed CPR in absolute darkness while navigating backward through a ravine that should have killed everyone who entered, did not mention the operator who had saved his life and the lives of his entire team through capabilities that existed in the shadows between official records and operational reality. After the ceremony, Carter approached Evelyn with his daughters in tow, 2-year-old twins who had no understanding of what their father had survived or who had saved him. Commander Blackwood, he said formally, then his voice broke. Thank you for giving me a chance to watch them grow up. Evelyn looked at the twins, at their innocent faces and bright eyes, in complete ignorance of how close they had come to growing up without a father. This is why we do it, she said quietly. This is what makes it worth the key, not medals or recognition or official acknowledgement. Just knowing that someone gets to go home to their family because we were willing to stand between them and death. She paused, meeting Carter's eyes with intensity that carried 8 years of impossible missions. Take care of them. Love them. Be present in their lives. Make your survival mean something by being the father they deserve. That's how you honor what happened in Ka-7 Valley. That's how you make the sacrifice worthwhile. 1 year after the Ka-7 operation, Admiral Sarah Brennan convened a classified ceremony at a secure facility in Virginia. The attendees were limited to operators with clearances so high they barely existed on paper. Warriors who understood that some awards could never be made public and some heroism could never be officially acknowledged. Evelyn Blackwood stood without assistance for the first time in months, her recovery progressing faster than medical projections had suggested, but still leaving her diminished from what she had been. Her hands trembled slightly, her limp was pronounced, her enhanced capabilities were gone. But she stood straight and proud in her dress uniform, wearing the trident that marked her as a SEAL and the ribbons that represented missions that would remain classified for decades. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Blackwood, Brennan said formally, for exceptional valor in combat and conspicuous gallantry in the face of overwhelming enemy forces, for 23 successful Wrath Protocol missions over 8 years of service, for saving the lives of 97 American warriors who would have died without your intervention. It is my honor to present you with the Navy Cross. Brennan pinned the medal on Evelyn's uniform, the second highest military decoration that the Navy could award. Recognition that acknowledged sacrifice while maintaining operational security about exactly what had been sacrificed. The citation that accompanied the medal was classified, would remain sealed until 2075, would never be seen by anyone without the highest clearances. But it told the truth about Divine Ghost and Wrath Protocol and 80 years of impossible missions. It told the truth about a warrior who had given everything to protect others and chosen mercy when vengeance would have been justified. After the ceremony, Evelyn found Emma Sullivan waiting outside the secure facility. The girl was 17 now, had been accepted to the Naval Academy, would begin training in 3 months to become a SEAL like her father had been. She had grown in the years since Ka 7 Valley, had matured in ways that went beyond physical development, had learned lessons about sacrifice and service that most people never learned in entire lifetimes. They told me about the medal, Emma said. Navy Cross, second highest decoration. It's just medal and ribbon, Evelyn replied. The real reward is knowing that 97 warriors went home to their families because of choices I made. That's what matters. Not awards or recognition, but impact. Lives saved, futures created, promises kept. Emma nodded, understanding in ways she would not have understood a year ago. I'm ready, Isam. She said, ready to start training, ready to become a guardian like my father was, like you are. No, Evelyn said gently, you're ready to become something better. You're ready to be the guardian who learned from our mistakes, who builds on our successes, who creates a future where warriors protect instead of just destroy, where guardians end cycles instead of perpetuating them. She pulled a small object from her pocket, 3 rifle rounds arranged in a triangle, the signature that Divine Ghost had left on battlefields across 3 continents. Your father gave me something precious 3 years ago. He gave me knowledge and training and the example of what it meant to be a guardian. Now I'm giving you the same gift, but I'm also giving you this. She placed the rounds in Emma's hand. When you complete your first mission as a SEAL, when you save lives that would have been lost without intervention, leave these somewhere the survivors will find them. Let them know that guardians are watching, that Divine Ghost legacy continues, that your father's sacrifice created something that will outlive all of us. Emma stared at the rounds, understanding the weight of what she was being given. Not just ammunition, but legacy. Not just tradition, but responsibility. Not just her father's memory, but the future he had died creating. I won't let you down, Emma said. I won't let him down. You couldn't if you tried, Evelyn replied, because you're Marcus Sullivan's daughter. Because you watch Divine Ghost keep promises to the dead. Because you understand what we're fighting for and why it matters. You're going to be better than both of us, and someday you'll train someone who's better than you. And that's how guardians live forever. Not through medals or monuments, but through the warriors we train and the futures we create and the promises we keep. They stood together in the Virginia sunshine, mentor and student, the woman who had been Divine Ghost and the girl who would carry that legacy forward. Behind them, the ceremony attendees departed in unmarked vehicles, warriors returning to shadows where they belonged. Above them, contrails crossed the sky as aircraft carried Americans to destinations they would reach safely because people like Evelyn and Marcus and Emma stood between darkness and light. 5 years later, in a valley half a world away from K7, but remarkably similar in its harsh beauty and capacity for violence, a Marine platoon pinned down by enemy fire in the Hindu Kush Mountains heard a cold voice on their radio giving directions with the kind of calm authority that cut through panic and chaos. The voice told them where to move, which positions to abandon and which to hold, clearing their path with impossible shots from impossible distances that dropped enemies with precision that defied the tactical situation. The Marines were 20 years old on average, fresh from training that had prepared them for combat, but not for the kind of ambush they had walked into, not for the coordinated assault that had killed their lieutenant and wounded half their number in the first 3 minutes of contact. They were scared and desperate and running out of ammunition and options, prepared to die in this anonymous valley, fighting enemies whose names they would never know. But the voice guided them through darkness and confusion and overwhelming enemy fire, told them to move left when mortars fell right, told them to take cover seconds before RPG rounds streaked overhead, told them which route would lead to safety and which would lead to death. And they survived because someone was watching over them, because a guardian had answered their desperate call without being asked, because legacy lived on through warriors who refused to let Americans die alone in foreign lands. When the shooting finally stopped, when the last enemy fled and the Marines could breathe without expecting bullets, they tried to find the operator who had saved them, searched the surrounding terrain with the desperate gratitude of people who owed their lives to a stranger, called out on radio frequencies requesting identification so they could properly thank whoever had pulled them back from death. They found nothing except 3 rifle rounds arranged in a triangle on a flat stone, positioned where it would be discovered by anyone searching the area. The signature of someone who protected warriors without seeking recognition, without requiring gratitude, without needing acknowledgement beyond the knowledge that Americans had survived who otherwise would not have. The mark of a guardian who fought in shadows so others could live in light, who kept promises made by warriors long dead, who understood that being divine ghost meant more than just one person's actions. It meant legacy. It meant tradition. It meant a promise that transcended individual lives and continued through generations of warriors who chose to protect instead of just destroy. The Marine platoon sergeant, a career warrior with 15 years of service and 3 combat deployments, stared at those 3 rounds and understood what he was looking at. He had heard the stories in the same way all special operations personnel heard stories. Whispered conversations in secure facilities and late-night tales told by operators who had survived impossible situations through intervention they could not explain. Divine ghost, he whispered, making the connection between legend and reality. She's real. After all these years, Divine Ghost is still operational. His corporal, younger and less experienced but equally grateful, picked up the rounds with reverent care. "Should we keep these, Sergeant?" "No," the sergeant replied. "We leave them. Other warriors might need to find them someday. Need to know that guardians are watching, that promises are kept, that legends sometimes walk among us carrying rifles and speaking in cold whispers and refusing to let Americans die while they still draw breath." They left the rounds where they had found them, a monument to salvation that would weather and fade but would exist for years as testament to warriors who protected without requiring recognition, who kept faith with the dead by serving the living, who understood that being a guardian meant more than just fighting. And somewhere in those same mountains, Emma Sullivan smiled behind her tactical mask, feeling her father's ghost walking beside her the same way Evelyn had felt it for 8 years. Feeling the weight of legacy that stretched from Marcus Sullivan through Evelyn Blackwood and now to her. Understanding that she was not just carrying on a tradition, but creating something new, something better, something that honored the sacrifices that had created her while building toward a future where those sacrifices might eventually become unnecessary. She was 21 years old, had graduated from the Naval Academy with honors, had completed SEAL training, and been accepted into a program that officially did not exist, but that everyone in special operations knew about through rumor and speculation. The same program that had created Divine Ghost, the same training that had enhanced Evelyn's capabilities and eventually destroyed them. The same path that her father had wanted her to walk and that Evelyn had prepared her to survive. But Emma was not Divine Ghost. She was something new. Guardian 01. The first operator in a new protocol that had learned from RAS mistakes, that emphasized team operations over individual sacrifice, that understood sustainable excellence mattered more than peak performance that destroyed operators from the inside. She carried her father's legacy and Evelyn's training and her own innovations, creating a synthesis that honored the past while building the future. She saved lives the same way Divine Ghost had saved lives, but she did it as part of a team that supported each other instead of alone, bearing the full weight of impossible missions. And when her missions were done, when the warriors she protected were safe, she left 3 rifle rounds arranged in a triangle, the same rounds Evelyn had given her 5 years ago, the same signature that had saved Tyler Brooks in Fallujah and SEAL Team 9 and K7, and countless other warriors across 3 continents in a decade of conflict. The legend continued. The promise remained. The Guardians kept watch. Back at Walter Reed Medical Center, Evelyn Blackwood sat in her office surrounded by students who were learning to be more than just warriors, who were training to become guardians in a tradition that stretched back through her to Marcus Sullivan, and forward through Emma to warriors not yet born. Her hands still trembled, her limp was permanent, her enhanced capabilities were completely gone, but her mind remained sharp, her experience was invaluable. Her ability to teach had only improved with time and perspective. She had trained 17 operators over 5 years, each one carefully selected from the best that special operations could produce. Each one taught the difference between killing enemies and protecting innocents. Each one prepared to walk the path that had cost Marcus his life and Evelyn her health, but had saved hundreds of American warriors in the process. And each one learned when not to pull the trigger, when to show mercy instead of delivering justice, when to end cycles instead of perpetuating them. The lesson that Evelyn had learned in Kaseban Valley when she spared Khalid al-Rahman, the choice that had defined her more than any kill she had ever made, the moment that had transformed Divine Ghost from weapon into guardian. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Mission success. 0 casualties. Package secure. Legacy honored. The sender was listed only as Guardian 01. Evelyn smiled, feeling Marcus Sullivan's ghost finally at peace after 8 years of haunting her decisions and guiding her choices. Emma had completed her first solo mission, had saved Marines who would have died, had kept the promise that stretched back through generations of warriors who understood that some things mattered more than personal glory or official recognition. She typed a single word in response, proud. Then she turned back to her students, to the next generation of guardians who would carry the burden forward when Emma's time came to transition from operator to instructor, who would keep the faith that Marcus had started and Evelyn had sustained, and Emma was now building into something that might finally end the need for guardians by creating a world where their protection was no longer necessary. The war continued. The battles raged on, but guardians stood watch, and that made all the difference. Always.